You're slacking off on the cleaning lately, huh? I can see dust gathering in the corners. Remember, you're at home all day, so do it properly. If I spot dust again, I'm selling your laptop. My husband John's been distant since I got busier with my cartoonist work. When I'm swamped with deadlines, he nags about house chores and even makes me redo them. He expects perfect cleaning since I'm home, but cartooning is my passion. I won't give up. Plus, John's hiding something, and I'm done forgetting him. I'm 31, and I freelance as a cartoonist. I draw essay-style cartoons and squeeze in work between household chores. When John and I, who's 35, got married 6 years ago, we agreed I'd be a full-time homemaker. 2 years into marriage, I lost both my parents and we moved into my inherited house, as I'm their only child. I didn't want to give up my passion for drawing cartoons, something I've been doing since my student days. I begged John, explaining that while I'm okay with being a housewife, my true dream is to earn a living through my cartoons. Right now, I'm only publishing independent comics, but could I please work from home? He seemed to think it was just a hobby but reluctantly agreed, so I kept drawing after we got married. About 6 months ago, a magazine editor spotted one of my cartoons on my website, and I landed a 2-page, 4-panel cartoon gig in their monthly magazine. Since then, more offers for cartooning and illustrating have come my way, keeping me busy. But when I excitedly shared this with John, his reaction was openly disgusted. "You're getting too caught up in this, aren't you? Your main role is supposed to be as a housewife, and your cartoons are just a side thing, right? I bet you're not making much, like pocket money." Why would you say that? I know you're not into cartoons, John, but being a cartoonist has always been my dream. It might be a small gig, but I'm getting paid, so I consider myself a professional. Please don't belittle it. But when I stood up for myself, John got even more upset. "You're dependent on me, and you dare to talk back. If you're unhappy, start earning more than me." I was stunned. I typically bring in about $600 a month, but I limit my workload because of him. And then there's John, always nitpicking about the housework, like, "You've been slacking on cleaning, huh? I see dust gathering. You're at home all day, so get it together. If I see dust again, I'm selling your laptop." It's like a threat, even though I know he's not serious. But it still scares me, and I end up spending time cleaning instead of meeting deadlines. When I'm busy, he gets even more annoying, pointing out every little thing that needs to be done around the house. Then came the breaking point. John always has dinner right when he gets home from work. That day was no different. He sat down, took a bite of the stew, and exploded. "What's this? The carrot isn't cooked properly. Are you trying to mess with me?" I come home exhausted, and this is what you serve your husband. I had been lost in my thoughts after meeting a deadline when John's sudden outburst snapped me back to reality. I turned to him just as he grabbed the glass of beer in front of him and splashed it over me. I was shocked. I never imagined I'd have beer thrown at me. The surprise hit me hard because I never saw it coming. I'm sorry. I must have been distracted while cooking. The rest of the meal should be fine, so you can just ignore the carrot. Midway through cooking, I realized I forgot to add the carrots. In my rush, I tossed them into the stew without parboiling them. Even though I had made sure the potatoes were cooked, I completely overlooked the carrots. It was unlike me to make such mistakes, and I felt awful. It seemed John couldn't forgive this slip-up as easily as I had hoped. It's frustrating to have a wife who can't even handle basic household tasks. "Maybe I shouldn't have married you," John muttered as he stood up and walked out of the dining room. I hurried after him as he headed towards the bedroom. "Where are you going?" "I need some space until you realize what you've done." "What?" I stood there stunned as John packed his things into a travel bag and walked out. I tried to follow him, but he hailed a taxi at the nearest station and disappeared. Despite my repeated calls and texts, he didn't respond or read my apologies. Overwhelmed, I collapsed and broke into tears. It was then that I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning around, I saw Mr. Tham, John's boss. We used to work together before John and I got married, with Mr. Tom being my boss who had mentored me when I first joined the company. "Mr. Tom, you smell like alcohol. Were you drinking while cooking?" I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "Hello. I hate to admit it, but I had a disagreement with John," he replied somberly. "That guy can be a bit arrogant sometimes. It's manageable when it's just work-related, but I can only imagine how frustrating it must be living with him." I vented, feeling relieved to share my feelings. Mr. Tom nodded in understanding, flashing his trademark bright smile. That smile had always been a source of comfort to me during tough times at work. We decided to grab a bite at a nearby diner and catch up. "So what's got you so upset?" he asked kindly. "Well, it's my fault. I messed up the cooking today, tried making a stew, but the carrots weren't cooked well, and it upset John." "Ah, happens to the best of us. My wife does the same sometimes. When it does, we just roll with it. Getting worked up doesn't help, you know." I appreciated that perspective. A smile crept onto my face as we chatted. "So, no argument over drinks then?" "No, the beer smell? That's from John splashing it on me because of the cooking mishap. I thought I'd dried off at the station, but clearly not," I chuckled. "I've had that happen. Even if someone says you smell of alcohol, it's hard to be sure," Mr. Tom chuckled back. "What? He splashed beer on you over a small cooking mistake? That doesn't sound like John at all. I never liked the guy, but I never thought he'd do that to his wife." Mr. Tom's voice dripped with genuine indignation, oddly lifting my spirits. "Why did you come to the station? You look like you ran here in your apron." "Another issue with John?" I asked. "Yeah, John got strange, called me lazy, and stormed out, saying he wouldn't return until I reflected on my actions. I followed him here, but he took a cab and left. I'm lost," I explained. Mr. Tom's angry expression softened. "I can't say for sure now, but I have a bad feeling. I'll look into John. You might want to check the house for anything he left behind," he advised before we parted ways for the day. Following his suggestion, I searched John's usual spots and found a hotel points card in his pants pocket. It had been recently used on a Saturday, a day he claimed to be working. Suspicion grew as I recalled something forgotten: the GPS locator app we installed before marriage. I checked it and found John in an unexpected place, a popular tourist spot known for romantic dates. Convinced he was with someone else, I called Mr. Tom the next day. "Mr. Tom, thank you for yesterday." "No problem. Is everything all right? Did John not show up for work today?" Mr. Tom remained silent for a moment before exhaling heavily. "Yes, he's on paid leave for the next 4 days. I suspected as much. I hate to say it, but he's probably—" "I understand. This helps clear things up. Thank you," I replied. After ending the call, I made a decision and left the house. I had been contemplating my next move. If John ever betrayed me, this is what I would do. Once my task was complete, I dialed another number. "Hey, it's been a while," I greeted. The person on the other end responded cheerfully, but as soon as I brought up John, they sided with me. I hung up feeling reassured, believing things would soon take a positive turn. The following day, accompanied by a few individuals, I headed to the location pinpointed by John's smartphone GPS. It led us to a resort hotel near a renowned tourist spot. Currently, he appeared to be outside the hotel, with the GPS indicating he was near the beach. John's face drained of color the moment he laid eyes on me. Seizing the opportunity, I quickly aimed my phone at him and snapped multiple pictures, capturing him alongside a young woman in her early 20s. I had been discreetly photographing them for the past half hour, while John applied suntan oil to the woman, who was clad in a bikini. I allowed them to swim, patiently waiting to gather irrefutable evidence of John's infidelity. Their carefree demeanor or their blatant display of affection didn't shock me. Rather, I felt a sense of relief that they were providing solid proof. What truly rattled John, besides seeing me, was the presence of my in-laws behind me, both regarding him with stern expressions. "What's happening here, John?" I approached with a forced smile, causing John to stumble backward in the sand and land on his rear. My mother-in-law let out a disappointed sigh. How disgraceful, even for my own son. And who is this woman you've abandoned your wife for? She's useless at home, John blurted out, hastily pointing at me and shifting blame. Is it fair to say she does absolutely nothing? Even if she occasionally skips cleaning, she handles laundry, cooking, and dishes every day, doesn't she? Even I sometimes skip cleaning, and I detest laundry so much I leave it to your father at times. That's because you had a part-time job, right? But it's different with Anne. She's a stay-at-home wife who spends her time drawing and playing. My mother-in-law interjected, her tone firm. John's words fueled my father-in-law's anger. You're completely clueless, he exclaimed, drawing the attention of those around us. Some even seemed ready to capture the scene with their smartphone cameras. Why don't we continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting? I suggested, and everyone agreed. My in-laws and I headed to a nearby restaurant where John and the woman he was cheating with changed from their swimsuits into casual clothes and joined us. Once seated, we listened to John's explanation. I wanted Anne to be a stay-at-home wife, but she picked up this useless hobby of drawing cartoons and neglected her housework. When she refuses to obey me, it's only natural for me to seek a replacement wife, John declared. Mary was quick to respond. Wait, that's different from what you told me. You said you were troubled because of a stalker at your house, and you wanted to escape that reality for a while. I suggested going to the police, but you assured me the stalker would be caught soon. I wouldn't have gone out with you if I knew you had a wife, Mary sobbed, her distress evident. It turned out she was a college student who had met John on a dating app. Attracted to an older man, she agreed to date him, only to realize she had been deceived. I'm really sorry. I won't contact John again. Consider this a lesson learned, and I'll be more careful next time. Mary apologized, bowing deeply to me and my in-laws before showing us the screen where she deleted John's number. Leaving some money for her coffee on the table, she hurriedly left. I shot a glare at John, who looked stunned by Mary's departure. It's only natural that I have my own feelings and circumstances. I'm not some robot you can manipulate. Cheating just because things aren't going well is despicable, I admonished. Before John could respond, my father-in-law interjected, his tone firm. You still seem too content, John. But who's the one working and providing for Anne? You should respect me as the breadwinner. John trembled with anger, but my father-in-law addressed him calmly. You're acting like a child. Just because things aren't going your way, you're throwing tantrums like a toddler. Learn to accept reality. There's nothing more to say. With that, my in-laws stood up, settled the bill, and made their way to the register. Left alone with John, I found myself at a loss for words. John, I've been offered a serial comic strip in a magazine, I announced. John's demeanor shifted completely, and he looked at me with surprise. Oh, congratulations. Because of this opportunity, I can no longer be the stay-at-home wife you want. I'm sorry, but I'm tired of being with you, John. I want a divorce. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. You can pursue your comics, and I'll help with the housework. I won't be arrogant anymore, John pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. But I couldn't bear to look at him any longer. I'm sorry, but that's not the issue anymore. You looked down on me, didn't you? I believed marriage was about equality, but you saw yourself as superior because you were the provider, didn't you? Maybe I did, but I changed. I promise I won't make you suffer anymore. Please don't talk about breaking up, John begged. I've made the decision to sell the house we lived in. I have a relative who works in real estate, and they've agreed to buy it from me. There's still some paperwork and arrangements to finalize, so it won't happen immediately, but it'll be at a lower price than if we went through a broker. It's my house, and I have the right to do as I please with it, don't I? I want to end our relationship as soon as possible. I'm planning to leave tomorrow, and you should find somewhere else to stay as well. With that, I rose from my seat and headed for the exit. Unlike the day John left, he was now desperately chasing after me. However, when I got into the car, my father-in-law, who was behind the wheel, swiftly drove off. As I slammed the door shut, I saw John running after us, tears streaming down his face, but soon he disappeared from view. Afterward, It seemed John didn't believe what I had done. Upon his return from his trip and discovering the house empty of my belongings, he called me, his voice filled with anguish. I reluctantly answered the phone. "Why did you sell the house? It was our home, wasn't it?" "Why are you saying such things? It's the house I inherited from my parents, remember? But I should have some rights to it too, shouldn't I? In fact, there are no automatic inheritance rights for spouses when it comes to property. If you understand, please leave the house as soon as possible. Expect a call from the lawyer regarding alimony and divorce. Don't try to avoid it, okay?" I stated firmly before ending the call. Later, it seemed that John faced criticism from Mr. Tham for taking paid leave to go on a trip with his mistress. While there was no requirement to disclose the reason for taking time off, he was interrogated for betraying his wife. John faced difficulties at work, feeling ostracized by his colleagues and uncomfortable every day. Additionally, his in-laws had cut ties with him. John attempted to return to his in-laws' house, but they turned him away. After paying alimony, John depleted his savings and began accumulating debt. He now resides alone in a modest apartment, struggling to manage household tasks and leading a chaotic life. I later learned these details from Mr. Tham, but I felt no sympathy. Meanwhile, I settled into a tidy studio apartment and focused on creating drafts for my serialized comic strip. It's an anthology-style comic, drawing inspiration from various people's experiences. The next story I plan to illustrate revolves around marital infidelity, and I'm contemplating using John's situation as material.
It was just another mundane Monday morning. I sat at my desk, staring at the computer screen, my fingers idly tapping against the keyboard. My eyes kept wandering to the bank statement lying next to me, a nagging feeling tugging at the back of my mind. Something wasn't right. I picked up the statement, scanning the list of transactions once again. A frown creased my forehead as I spotted the discrepancy, a recurring charge for an unfamiliar vendor amounting to a sizable sum each month. It didn't align with any of our typical expenses. "Nolan?" I called out to my husband, who was in the adjacent room. He poked his head through the doorway, his brows raised in question. "What's up, Bree?" I held up the bank statement, my eyes narrowing. "Do you know anything about these charges? They've been happening for a while now, and I can't figure out what they're for." Nolan glanced at the statement, his expression unreadable. He shrugged nonchalantly. "Must have slipped your mind. It's probably some subscription or something." I pursed my lips, unconvinced. "But for this much and for so long, I don't remember signing up for anything like this." He crossed the room, planting a kiss on my forehead. "You know how forgetful you can be sometimes," he said with a chuckle. "Don't worry about it. I'll look into it." His dismissive attitude only fueled my suspicion. I watched as he turned and left the room, a sinking feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. Throughout the day, my mind kept drifting back to the mysterious charges. Nolan's cavalier response did little to assuage my concerns. If anything, it made me more determined to uncover the truth. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I broached the subject again. "So, did you ever figure out what those charges were for?" Nolan paused mid-bite, his eyes flickering briefly before settling on mine. "Nope, haven't had a chance yet, but I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." His lack of urgency only served to heighten my unease. "Nolan, we're talking about thousands of dollars here. How can you be so blasé about it?" He let out an exasperated sigh. "Brielle, I promise I'll look into it, but you need to trust me on this." Trust. The word hung heavy in the air, its weight pressing down on me. I wanted to trust him. I loved him, after all. But something deep within me refused to let go of the nagging doubt. As the days passed, the mysterious charges continued to appear, and Nolan's promises to investigate remained unfulfilled. The seed of suspicion had been planted, and with each passing day, it took root, growing stronger and more insidious. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to get to the bottom of this, no matter where the truth might lead. The days blurred together, each one more strained than the last. Nolan's late nights at the office became more frequent, his excuses growing flimsier with each passing week. The distance between us seemed to widen with every lie that slipped from his lips. "Another late meeting," he muttered one evening as he rushed out the door. his tie askew and his briefcase haphazardly stuffed with papers. I didn't bother responding. What was the point? Theo, our 8-year-old son, watched his father's departure with a puzzled frown. "Mom, why is Dad always working so late?" I forced a smile, ruffling his hair. "He's just been really busy lately, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." But Theo's innocent question stirred something within me. The seeds of doubt that had taken root were now sprouting, their tendrils wrapping around my heart and constricting tighter with each passing day. A few evenings later, as I was tucking Theo into bed, he piped up again. "Mom, who's Cora?" I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "What did you say?" "Cora," he repeated, his brow furrowed. "Dad keeps talking about her at work." A cold chill ran down my spine. Pushing down the rising panic, I managed a strained smile. "I'm sure it's just someone from the office, honey. Nothing to worry about." But as I left Theo's room, my mind was racing. Who was this Cora? And why was Nolan constantly mentioning her name? The next day, I confided in my best friend Elise over coffee. "Am I being paranoid here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Or is there something going on that I'm missing?" Elise's expression softened with concern. "Bree, you know I love Nolan, but his behavior lately has been sketchy, to say the least. Those late nights, the unexplained charges, it's not looking good." I swallowed hard, my grip tightening around my mug. "And now this Cora woman? What am I supposed to think?" Elise reached across the table, squeezing my hand reassuringly. "Look, I hate to say this, but I've heard rumors around the office about Nolan being seen with another woman." The air seemed to be sucked from my lungs. "You're kidding." She shook her head solemnly. "I wish I were. It could be nothing, but—" Her words trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, everything started to make sense. The late nights, the mysterious charges, the unknown woman's name. A sickening realization washed over me. Could Nolan really be having an affair? A few weeks later, I found myself at a company event hosted by Nolan's firm. I had been dreading the evening, but I knew it was crucial to put on a brave face, at least for the time being. As I mingled with colleagues and their spouses, my eyes constantly scanned the room, searching for any sign of the mysterious Cora. Part of me hoped she was just a figment of my imagination, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But deep down I knew the truth was far more sinister. And then, as if summoned by my very thoughts, she appeared. A stunning woman in a form-fitting red dress, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in perfect waves. She moved through the crowd with an air of confidence, turning heads wherever she went. My heart sank as I watched her approach a group of Nolan's coworkers, exchanging friendly banter and laughing at their jokes. This was her, Cora, the woman who had been occupying so much of my husband's time and thoughts. As if sensing my gaze, she turned and caught my eye. For a moment her expression faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, replaced by a casual smile. She sauntered over to me, her hips swaying with each step. "Hi there," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Cora. You must be one of the wives." I forced a tight-lipped smile, grasping her hand briefly. "Brielle. Nice to meet you." Her eyes widened ever so slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Lovely to meet you too, Brielle. I've heard so much about you." The lie dripped from her lips like honey, sickly sweet and utterly false. Anger bubbled within me, but I kept my composure, nodding politely. "So, Cora," I said, my voice carefully measured, "how do you know my husband?" She laughed, a tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. "Oh, we've been working on a project together for a while now. Nolan's just the best, always staying late to make sure everything's perfect." My stomach churned at the implication behind her words. So, this was the reason for all those late nights, all those flimsy excuses. Nolan had been spending his time with this woman, this Cora, right under my nose. "That's wonderful," I managed, fighting to keep the sarcasm from seeping into my tone. "He's so dedicated to his work." Cora nodded eagerly, oblivious to the venom laced in my words. "Absolutely. He's been such a great partner to work with." She leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. "Between you and me, he's mentioned a few times how his wife doesn't really understand the demands of his job." My hands clenched into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. The audacity of this woman standing before me and essentially admitting to her role in my husband's betrayal was almost too much to bear. but I forced myself to remain calm, to play along. For now. I would have my revenge, but it would be calculated, precise. Nolan and his mistress would reap what they had sown, and the consequences would be devastating. The days following the company event were a blur of pain and anger. I could barely look at Nolan without feeling a surge of white-hot rage coursing through my veins. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. I knew I needed to confront him, to finally bring this sordid affair into the light. But I also knew I couldn't do it blindly. I needed proof, evidence to back up my accusations. That's when I reached out to a private investigator, a discreet professional recommended by a friend. Within days, he had compiled a dossier of damning information. Photographs of Nolan and Cora together, receipts for lavish dinners and hotel stays, even records of suspicious financial transactions. Armed with this arsenal of evidence, I summoned Nolan home early one evening, my hands trembling as I laid out the incriminating materials on the kitchen table. When he walked through the door, his brow furrowed at the sight before him. "Bree, what's going on?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You know exactly what's going on, Nolan. Or should I say, you and Cora know what's going on." His face paled, his eyes flickering towards the damning evidence. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence," I snapped, my voice rising. "I have proof of your affair. The late nights, the unexplained expenses, the cozy dinners and hotel trysts. It's all right here." Nolan's shoulders slumped, and he sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "Brielle, I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "You're sorry? That's all you have to say after betraying me, after lying to me for who knows how long?" He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "It's not that simple. We grew apart, Bree. You were always so focused on your work, and I felt neglected. Cora, she made me feel appreciated again." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "So what? That justifies cheating on me." "Lying to me, to our son?" Nolan's gaze dropped, shame etched across his features. "No, of course not. I know I've made a terrible mistake, but I want to make things right, Bree. I still love you." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and grating. "Love me? You have a twisted way of showing it, Nolan." As I stared at the man before me, the one I had once trusted implicitly, I felt a steely resolve settle over me. This was not the end, not by a long shot. Nolan would pay for his betrayal, for the pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me and our family. And I would be the one to make him suffer the consequences of his actions. In the days following my confrontation with Nolan, a cold determination settled over me. I would not be the scorned wife, meekly accepting his betrayal and moving on. No, Nolan would face the full consequences of his actions, and I would be the one to ensure it happened. My first step was to consult with a lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit, recommended by a friend who had gone through an ugly divorce herself. As I laid out the evidence of Nolan's affair and financial misdeeds, her eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger. "We're going to bleed him dry," she assured me, a savage grin spreading across her face. "He won't know what hit him." With her guidance, I began meticulously documenting every transaction, every shred of proof that could be used against Nolan. Late nights were spent poring over bank statements and credit card bills, tracking the money he had funneled away to support his dalliances with Cora. Nolan, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued with his routine, working late, spinning his lies, and no doubt reassuring his mistress that everything would be fine. Little did he know, the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. In the meantime, I took steps to protect myself and Theo. Quietly, I began siphoning funds into a separate account, squirreling away a nest egg for when the inevitable fallout occurred. I knew Nolan would try to retaliate, to punish me for exposing his deceit, but I would be ready. Elise, my ever-loyal friend, was a constant source of support during this time. Over coffee and tear-stained tissues, she listened as I poured out my rage and anguish, offering a steady shoulder to lean on. "You're doing the right thing, Bree," she assured me, her eyes fierce with determination. "That bastard deserves everything that's coming to him." With each passing day, my resolve only grew stronger. I was a woman possessed, driven by a burning desire for justice and retribution. Nolan had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible, and he would pay dearly for that transgression. The final piece fell into place when I secured copies of Nolan's employment contract and company policy documents. Hidden amongst the legalese was a clause explicitly prohibiting misuse of company resources for personal gain, a violation that could result in termination. A slow, savage smile spread across my face as I realized the devastating implications. Not only would Nolan face the consequences of his actions in our personal lives, but his professional world was about to come crashing down as well. With the evidence compiled and my ducks in a row, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Nolan had made his bed, and now it was time for him to lie in it. The only question remaining was how far I would go to ensure his rightful punishment was carried out. And the answer? As far as it took. It was the annual Newland family gathering, an event Nolan and I used to look forward to each year. A chance to reconnect with relatives, share stories, and bask in the warmth of familial love. This year, however, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension. Nolan kept shooting furtive glances in my direction, no doubt sensing the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. As the evening progressed, I bided my time, making small talk and laughing at the appropriate moments. All the while, I could feel the weight of the evidence burning in my purse, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. Finally, as dessert was being served, I couldn't contain it any longer. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and cleared my throat loudly. "If I could have everyone's attention, please," I announced, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. Conversation died down, and all eyes turned towards me. A mixture of curiosity and concern etched on their faces. "I have something I need to share with all of you," I continued, tugging the manila envelope from my purse. "Something that concerns my husband, Nolan." Nolan's face drained of color, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table. "Brielle, what are you doing?" he hissed. I ignored him, pulling out the stack of photographs and spreading them across the table. "These are just a few examples of the evidence I've gathered, proving that Nolan has been engaged in a long-term affair with another woman." Gasps rippled through the room, and I heard my mother-in-law let out a strangled cry. Nolan's siblings leaned in, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. "It gets worse," I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with each word. "Not only has Nolan been unfaithful, but he's also been siphoning money from our joint accounts to fund his escapades with this woman." I produced the bank statements and receipts, laying them out alongside the damning photographs. "Brielle, please," Nolan pleaded, his face ashen. "This isn't the place." "No, this is exactly the place," I snapped, rounding on him. "You made your choices, Nolan. Choices that betrayed our vows, our family. Now it's time for you to face the consequences in front of everyone who knows us." Silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the occasional sniffle or muffled sob. Nolan's head was bowed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But I wasn't done yet. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out the final document, the copy of Nolan's employment contract. "According to this, your actions constitute a gross misuse of company resources, which is grounds for immediate termination." Nolan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with horror. "No, you can't." "I can, and I will," I said, my voice laced with steel. "You've left me no choice, Nolan. You brought this upon yourself." With that, I gathered my belongings and made my way towards the door, pausing only to look back at the shattered remains of my once happy family. "I hope it was worth it," I spat, before turning on my heel and walking away, leaving Nolan to face the fallout of his betrayal head-on. The days following the family gathering were a whirlwind of activity. Nolan's betrayal had been laid bare for all to see, and the consequences were swift and merciless. I wasted no time in filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and infidelity as the grounds. My lawyer, ever the shark, ensured that the proceedings moved swiftly, leaving Nolan little room to maneuver. "He's finished," she assured me, a predatory gleam in her eye. "We're going to take him for everything he's worth," and take him we did. With the evidence of his affair and financial misdeeds, I was able to secure a favorable settlement, full custody of Theo, the house, and a sizable portion of our assets. Nolan, for his part, seemed resigned to his fate. The once confident man was reduced to a shell of his former self, his arrogance replaced by a haunted, hollow look. "Brielle, please," he begged during one of our meetings with the lawyers. Can't we try to work things out for Theo's sake? I fixed him with a cold, steely gaze. You should have thought about Theo before you decided to betray us. This is the bed you made, Nolan. Now lie in it. My words seemed to strike him like a physical blow, and he slumped back in his chair, defeated. But the true coup de grace was yet to come. With the divorce proceedings underway, I turned my attention to Nolan's professional life. Armed with the evidence of his misuse of company resources, I reached out to his firm's HR department, ensuring that the appropriate parties were made aware of his transgressions. Within days, the hammer dropped. Nolan was summoned to a meeting with his superiors, where he was confronted with the damning evidence of his affair and the financial trail leading back to the company. According to a friend who worked there, the confrontation was brutal, with Nolan's once-respected reputation lying in tatters. In the end, he was given an ultimatum: resign immediately or face termination and potential legal action. Nolan, his pride in shreds, had no choice but to tender his resignation. The news spread like wildfire through our social circles and professional networks. Whispers and sidelong glances followed Nolan wherever he went, his name tainted by the scandal of his own making. As for Cora, the woman at the center of the storm, she too faced consequences. Her involvement with a married man and the misuse of company resources that entailed cost her own job and reputation. In the blink of an eye, the lives they had so carelessly betrayed me to build together came crashing down around them. And through it all, I remained steadfast, ensuring that Nolan's transgressions were laid bare for all to see. He had made his choices, and now he would pay the price, in full and with interest. It was a harsh lesson, but one that he had brought upon himself. And as I watched him grapple with the fallout, a part of me felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Justice, it seemed, had finally been served. The dust had finally settled, and the divorce was finalized. As I stood in the courtroom, listening to the judge's ruling, a sense of relief washed over me. The nightmare was over, and I had emerged victorious. Full custody of Theo, the house, and a substantial portion of our assets. It was more than I could have hoped for. Nolan, on the other hand, was left with little more than the tattered remnants of his once promising career and a mountain of debt. As we exited the courthouse, Elise was waiting for me, her face beaming with pride. "You did it, Bree," she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight embrace. "That bastard got exactly what he deserved." I nodded, my throat tightening with emotion. It's over, finally. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life, piece by piece. With Nolan's financial support, I was able to quit my job and take some much-needed time off, allowing me to be there for Theo in a way I hadn't been able to before. My son, bless his heart, seemed to be handling the upheaval remarkably well. He was too young to fully grasp the complexities of what had transpired, but he knew that his father's absence was a result of his own actions. "Daddy made some bad choices," he said to me one day, his brow furrowed in childlike contemplation. "But you're here for me, Mom. That's what matters." Those words, spoken with such innocent wisdom, filled me with a sense of pride and determination. I had fought tooth and nail to protect my family, to ensure that Nolan's betrayal didn't rob Theo of the stability and love he deserved. And now, as I looked towards the future, I saw a world of possibilities opening up before us. With the financial settlement and the weight of Nolan's betrayal lifted from my shoulders, I felt a newfound sense of freedom, a liberation from the shackles of my past. No longer was I the dutiful wife, blindly trusting and turning a blind eye to the harsh realities around me. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had stared down adversity and emerged stronger for it. In the months that followed, I secured a new job, one that allowed me the flexibility to be present for Theo while still pursuing my own ambitions. It was a fresh start, a clean slate, and I embraced it wholeheartedly. As for Nolan, his life had crumbled around him, the consequences of his actions too severe to brush aside. From what I heard through the grapevine, he had been forced to take a menial job, his once promising career in ruins. Cora, too, had disappeared from the picture, her own reputation tarnished by the scandal. A part of me felt a twinge of pity for them, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of vindication. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the fallout. As I looked back on the tumultuous journey that had brought me to this point, I realized that I had emerged not just victorious, but transformed. The naive, trusting woman I had once been was gone, replaced by a fierce, self-assured version of myself. I was no longer a victim, but a survivor, a role model for my son and a testament to the power of perseverance in the face of adversity. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, armed with the strength and resilience that had carried me through my darkest days. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was in control of my own destiny, and nothing would ever shake that foundation again. I woke up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the dimly lit room. The curtains were drawn, and only a sliver of sunlight peeked through. As I reached for the lamp on the nightstand, my hand trembled, a reminder of the arduous battle I'd been fighting against the ruthless illness that had ravaged my body. "Good morning, sweetheart," Graham's voice rang out, dripping with saccharine sweetness. "How are you feeling today?" I turned to see him standing in the doorway, a broad smile plastered across his face. By his side was Elliot, his son from a previous marriage, his expression a mirror of Graham's. "I'm feeling a bit better," I rasped, my throat still raw from the treatments. Graham's smile grew wider, and he exchanged a knowing glance with Elliot. "That's wonderful news, dear," he said, his tone laced with something I couldn't quite place. Elliot stepped forward, his eyes locked on mine. "Yeah, we're both so happy to hear that." He chimed in, his voice lacking the sincerity of his words. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Graham and Elliot had been nothing but attentive during my illness, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't ignore. As I struggled to sit up, Graham rushed to my side, his hand resting on my arm in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt oddly possessive. "Once she's gone, all this will be ours." "Elliot," he murmured, his voice low but carrying a weight that hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart dropped, and the room seemed to spin around me. The words echoed in my mind, their implication crystal clear. They were waiting for me to die, their eyes fixed on the prize, my hard-earned wealth and the boutique I had poured my life into. Tears stung my eyes as the crushing realization washed over me. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my heart and soul, was nothing more than a deceitful opportunist, and his own son was complicit in his schemes. In that moment, something shifted within me. The naivety that had once clouded my judgment shattered, and a new resolve took root. I would not be a victim, not in my own life, not in my own home. As Graham and Elliot turned to leave, their backs to me, I vowed silently that I would not go down without a fight. They had underestimated me, and I would make them pay for their betrayal. With a steely determination coursing through my veins, I knew that this was just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and I would stop at nothing to reclaim what was rightfully mine. My dignity, my independence, and the life I had worked so hard to build. I couldn't bring myself to confront Graham and Elliot head-on, not yet. Instead, I decided to bide my time, to gather evidence and build my case against them. As I lay in bed, feigning ignorance, my mind drifted back to the early days of my relationship with Graham. It had all started so innocently, a chance encounter at a charity gala. Graham, a wealthy businessman, had been instantly charmed by my wit and confidence. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and before long we were swept up in a whirlwind romance. "Seraphine," he had whispered, his eyes sparkling with adoration, "you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Caught up in the heady rush of new love, I had been blind to the warning signs. Graham's excessive flattery, his constant need for validation, and his tendency to lavish me with extravagant gifts should have raised red flags. But I was too enamored, too eager to believe that I had found the partner I had been searching for all my life. It wasn't until after our wedding that the cracks began to show. Graham's once charming demeanor morphed into something darker, more controlling. He would belittle me in front of his friends, making snide comments about my business acumen or my fashion choices. "A woman like you should be grateful to have a man like me," he would sneer, his words cutting deep. Elliot, who had been a sullen teenager when we first met, quickly fell in line with his father's twisted behavior. The two of them formed an unholy alliance, united in their disdain for me and their insatiable greed. Why don't you just sell that stupid boutique of yours? Elliot had once sneered, his lip curled in contempt. It's not like you're any good at running a business. I should have left then, should have gathered my dignity and walked away from their toxic influence. But I was too proud, too stubborn to admit defeat. As the years passed, Graham's financial troubles mounted, his businesses failing one by one. It was then that his true motivation became clear. He had set his sights on my boutique, the one successful venture I had built from the ground up. Once you're gone, your precious little shop will be mine, he had hissed, his eyes alight with malice. And now, as I lay in my sickbed, the full extent of their depravity had been revealed. They were willing to let me die, to sacrifice my life for their own selfish gain. But I was no longer the naive woman they thought they could manipulate. The fire of determination burned within me, fueling my resolve to bring them to their knees. As I watched Graham and Elliot leave the room, their shoulders slumped in disappointment at my continued survival, I knew that the time for action was drawing near. They had underestimated me, and they would pay dearly for their mistake. With my newfound determination, I wasted no time in putting my plan into motion. I knew that if I were to take down Graham and Elliot, I needed to be strategic and gather irrefutable evidence of their misdeeds. My first stop was the boutique, the very business they were so eager to get their greedy hands on. As I stepped through the doors, the familiar scent of jasmine and sandalwood enveloped me, offering a sense of comfort and familiarity in the midst of the chaos. Seraphine! Leo, my trusted employee, rushed over, his eyes wide with concern. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be resting? I mustered a reassuring smile, determined not to let my personal turmoil show. I'm feeling much better, Leo. In fact, I've never been more motivated. His brow furrowed, sensing the shift in my demeanor. Is everything okay? For a moment I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But then I remembered the unwavering loyalty Leo had shown me over the years, and I knew he deserved the truth. Graham and Elliot, I began, my voice low and steady. They've been plotting against me, waiting for me to die so they can get their hands on the boutique. Leo's jaw dropped, his expression a mix of shock and outrage. Those bastards! He exclaimed, his fists clenching at his sides. How could they do such a thing? I placed a calming hand on his arm, grateful for his unwavering support. That's why I need your help, Leo. We have to gather evidence of their schemes, anything that can expose their true motives. His eyes hardened with resolve, and he nodded firmly. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. Over the next few days, Leo and I pored over financial records, invoices and receipts, searching for any discrepancies or irregularities that could point to Graham's involvement in my business affairs. It didn't take long to uncover the first bombshell. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been siphoned from the boutique's accounts into offshore holdings under Graham's name. That lying snake, Leo spat, slamming his fist on the desk. He's been stealing from you all this time. I felt a surge of vindication, but also a profound sense of betrayal. The man I had once loved, the man I had trusted with everything, had been robbing me blind all along. But the evidence didn't stop there. We uncovered records of lavish vacations, expensive cars, and designer watches, all purchased with funds stolen from my hard-earned business. As the puzzle pieces fell into place, a newfound determination took root within me. I would no longer be the victim of Graham's greed and deceit. It was time to take back what was rightfully mine. With Leo by my side, I began to meticulously document every shred of evidence, building an airtight case against Graham and his conniving son. They thought they could rob me of my dignity, my independence, and my livelihood, but they had gravely underestimated my resilience. As I stood in the boutique, surrounded by the very business they had tried to strip from me, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. This was my legacy, my life's work, and I would fight tooth and nail to protect it. Thing this on, and this held all the cards. Armed with the damning evidence Leo and I had uncovered, I knew it was time to take the next step. I needed to secure my assets and ensure that Graham and Elliot couldn't wriggle their way out of the consequences they so richly deserved. That's when I reached out to Marina, my best friend and a formidable lawyer. We had known each other since college, bonding over our shared ambition and determination to succeed in a male-dominated world. Marina, I need your help, I said, my voice tense as I recounted the sordid details of Graham's betrayal. To her credit, Marina didn't flinch. She simply nodded, her eyes steely with resolve. "Say no more, Sarah. We're going to make sure those bastards pay for what they've done." Over the next few days, Marina and I worked tirelessly, poring over legal documents and financial records. She was a master strategist, finding every loophole and exploiting every weakness in Graham's carefully constructed web of deceit. "We need to revise your will," she said, her fingers tapping purposefully on the desk. "Make sure that not a single cent of your fortune goes to that snake or his weasel of a son." I nodded, my jaw set with determination. "Absolutely. They don't deserve a penny of what I've built." As we delved deeper into the legal intricacies, Marina's admiration for my strength grew. "You know, most women in your position would have crumbled," she remarked, her eyes shining with pride. "But not you. You're a fighter, Sarah." Her words buoyed me, reminding me of the steel that coursed through my veins. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman who had fallen for Graham's lies. I was a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. With Marina's guidance, we crafted an airtight strategy. Not only would I be protected from Graham's greed, but we would also set a trap, a carefully laid snare that would ensnare him in his own web of deceit. "He won't see it coming," Marina grinned, her eyes glinting with anticipation. "And when he does, it'll be too late." As the pieces fell into place, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. Graham and Elliot had underestimated me at every turn, and now they would face the full force of my wrath. The day we finalized the legal documents, Marina raised her glass in a toast. "To reclaiming what's yours, Sarah. May those snakes get everything they deserve." I clinked my glass against hers, a newfound sense of empowerment coursing through my veins. They won't know what hit them. With Marina by my side, I knew that victory was within reach. Graham and Elliot had made the grave mistake of crossing a woman who was no longer content to play the victim. I was a force to be reckoned with, and they were about to learn that lesson the hard way. As I left Marina's office, my head held high. I couldn't help but smile. The tide had turned, and the predators were about to become the prey. It was time for Graham and Elliot to face the consequences of their actions, and I would savor every moment of their downfall. With the legal groundwork laid and my assets secured, it was time to move to the next phase of my plan, confronting Graham and Elliot head-on. I knew it was a risky move, but the thrill of finally taking control of the situation was too intoxicating to resist. It was a crisp autumn evening when I invited them over for a family dinner, playing the part of the oblivious wife to perfection. As they arrived, Graham's eyes lit up with a mix of greed and surprise. "Seraphine, darling," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Are you sure you're up for hosting dinner? You should be resting." I mustered a weak smile, determined to keep up the charade. "Nonsense, Graham. I'm feeling much better, and I wanted to have a nice family meal." Elliot shot me a skeptical glance. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "If you say so," he muttered, brushing past me into the dining room. As we sat down to eat, the tension in the air was palpable. Graham and Elliot made small talk, their eyes occasionally darting to the silverware and china, no doubt mentally appraising their potential value. Finally, as the main course was cleared away, I decided it was time to strike. "Graham, Elliot," I began, my voice steady and unwavering, "there's something I need to discuss with you both." Graham's brow furrowed, his mask of concern slipping ever so slightly. "Of course, dear. What is it?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. "I know what you've been up to." The silence that followed was deafening, the air thick with tension. Graham and Elliot exchanged a panicked glance, their faces draining of color. I don't know what you're talking about," Graham stammered, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile playing on my lips. "Oh, I think you do. The embezzlement, the offshore accounts, the fancy cars and vacations, all paid for with money you stole from my business." Elliot's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. "You have no proof," he spat, his eyes blazing with fury. With a flick of my wrist, I produced a thick stack of documents. The damning evidence Leo and I had gathered. "I think you'll find that I do." Graham's face contorted into a mask of rage, his true colors finally revealed. "You conniving bitch," he snarled, slamming his fist on the table. You think you can take everything from me? I met his gaze unflinchingly, my resolve unwavering. I'm not taking anything from you, Graham. I'm simply reclaiming what's rightfully mine. Elliot leaped to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor. This isn't over, he growled, his eyes burning with hatred. We'll make you pay for this. I couldn't help but laugh, a rich, mocking sound that only seemed to infuriate them further. Oh, my dear boy, it's already over. You just don't know it yet. As they stormed out of the house, hurling insults and threats over their shoulders, I felt a sense of exhilaration coursing through my veins. The game was afoot, and for the first time I held all the cards. Graham and Elliot had underestimated me, thinking I was nothing more than a meek, submissive woman, but they were about to learn a brutal lesson. I was a force to be reckoned with, and I would stop at nothing to reclaim what was mine. The days following my explosive confrontation with Graham and Elliot were a whirlwind of activity. With Marina's guidance, we wasted no time in setting our legal strategy into motion. First, we filed for divorce, citing Graham's embezzlement and financial misdeeds as grounds for the dissolution of our marriage. The paperwork was airtight, backed by the mountain of evidence Leo and I had gathered. He won't know what hit him, Marina grinned as she slid the documents across her desk for my signature. By the time this is over, he'll be lucky to have the clothes on his back. Next, we turned our attention to the criminal charges. Graham's theft from my business, coupled with his blatant fraud and money laundering, was more than enough to ensure he faced serious consequences. As we sat in Marina's office, poring over the legal documents, a loud knock at the door interrupted our work. Marina's assistant poked her head in, her face pale. Miss Cole, the police are here. They say they need to speak with you and Miss Westbrook immediately. Marina and I exchanged a knowing glance, silently bracing ourselves for the confrontation to come. Sure enough, two stern-faced detectives strode into the office, their eyes fixed on Graham's financials spread across Marina's desk. Miss Westbrook? Mr. Westbrook, the taller detective began, his voice gruff. We have reason to believe that you've been involved in a massive embezzlement scheme, siphoning funds from your wife's business into offshore accounts. Graham, who had been summoned to Marina's office under the guise of signing divorce papers, blanched visibly. This is preposterous, he sputtered, his eyes darting wildly between Marina and me. I would never do such a thing. The detective arched an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Graham's bravado. Is that so? Then perhaps you can explain these financial records? He slid a stack of documents across the desk, the very evidence Leo and I had painstakingly gathered. Graham's eyes widened as he frantically flipped through the pages, his facade crumbling with each damning entry. This is a mistake, he stammered, his voice quavering. These records must have been doctored. Marina let out a derisive snort, her eyes narrowed in contempt. Save it, Graham. The jig is up, and you know it. As the detective slapped handcuffs on Graham's wrists, reading him his rights, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication wash over me. The man who had once held so much power over me, the man who had sought to strip me of everything I held dear, was now being led away in disgrace. But the true triumph came when Elliot burst into the office, his face flushed with fury. What's going on here? He demanded, his eyes wild. Where's my father? Marina gestured towards the door, a wicked smile playing on her lips. Your father is being taken into custody, Elliot. It seems his little embezzlement scheme has finally caught up with him. Elliot's jaw dropped, his eyes darting between Graham and the detectives. No, this can't be happening. I couldn't resist twisting the knife, relishing in his anguish. Oh, but it is, Elliot. Your father's greed has finally come back to bite him, and you're next. As the detectives hauled Graham away, his muffled protests fading into the distance, I turned to face Elliot. The fear in his eyes was palpable, and I reveled in the knowledge that his world was crumbling around him. You thought you could take everything from me, I said, my voice laced with barely contained triumph. But in the end, you'll be lucky if you're left with the shirts on your backs. Elliot opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips. He knew the game was up, and there was nothing he could do to stop the wheels of justice from turning. As he slunk out of Marina's office, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I couldn't help but savor the moment. Graham and Elliot had underestimated me at every turn, and now they were paying the ultimate price for their hubris. The battle was won, and I had emerged victorious, a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had reclaimed her power and her dignity in the face of overwhelming odds. The days leading up to Graham's trial were a whirlwind of activity. The media had caught wind of the scandal, and the story of the embezzling husband and his deceitful stepson dominated the headlines. As Marina and I arrived at the courthouse, a throng of reporters swarmed us, cameras flashing and microphones thrust in our faces. "Miss Westbrook, how do you feel knowing your husband betrayed you in such a despicable way? Do you think Graham and Elliot will receive the maximum sentence?" I pushed through the crowd, my jaw set with determination. Marina fought her way to my side, her steely gaze daring the reporters to cross her. "No comment," she barked, her voice cutting through the cacophony of questions. "We'll have our say in the courtroom." As the courtroom doors swung open, I caught my first glimpse of Graham and Elliot since their arrests. They sat at the defense table, their once arrogant demeanors replaced by a sullen, defeated air. Graham's eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved, the charming, charismatic figure who had swept me off my feet. But that illusion was quickly shattered by the cold reality of his betrayal, and I felt nothing but contempt for the man before me. The trial was a brutal affair, with Marina systematically dismantling Graham's flimsy defense. Each witness, each piece of damning evidence, served to further unravel the web of lies he had so carefully constructed. "Mr. Westbrook, you stand accused of embezzling over $2 million from your wife's business," the prosecutor stated, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "How do you plead?" Graham's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate bid for escape. "Not guilty," he croaked, the words ringing hollow even to his own ears. As the trial wore on, the weight of the evidence against Graham and Elliot became insurmountable. Bank records, financial statements, even damning testimony from former employees, all of it pointed to their guilt. Elliot, his once youthful arrogance replaced by a pale, haunted expression, took the stand in a last-ditch effort to salvage their crumbling defense. "My father and I were just trying to protect our family's interests," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "We never meant to cause any harm." Marina seized the opportunity, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Is that so, Mr. Westbrook? Then why did you and your father make numerous attempts to conceal the embezzled funds in offshore accounts?" Elliot's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. He was caught, trapped in the inescapable web of his own lies. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, a hush fell over the gallery. The foreman stood, his expression grave, and delivered the verdict we had all been waiting for. On the charges of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering, we find the defendants, Graham Westbrook and Elliot Westbrook, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, but I remained steadfast, my gaze fixed on Graham and Elliot. Their faces were a study in anguish, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. As the judge handed down their sentences, lengthy prison terms and hefty fines, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. These men, who had once held such power over me, were reduced to nothing more than common criminals, their greed and deceit laid bare for all to see. As the bailiffs led them away, Graham turned to me one last time, his eyes pleading for forgiveness. But I had none to give. He had made his choices, and now he would have to live with the consequences. In the aftermath of the trial, I found myself standing in the bustling boutique that had been at the center of this sordid saga. Leo approached me, his eyes shining with admiration. "You did it, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You beat them at their own game." I surveyed the shop, taking in the familiar sights and scents that had once brought me such joy. Now they represented something more, a symbol of my resilience, my refusal to be a victim. "No, Leo," I replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "We did it. Together, we reclaimed what was rightfully ours." As I looked toward the future, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But with the strength and determination I had discovered within myself, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, stronger, wiser, and forever unbroken. The months following Graham and Elliot's sentencing were a whirlwind of activity. With the legal battles finally behind me, I was able to turn my attention to rebuilding my life and my business. The first order of business was revitalizing the boutique. I poured every ounce of my energy into breathing new life into the place that had once been the source of so much turmoil. Leo was by my side every step of the way, his unwavering support and loyalty a constant source of strength. Together, we overhauled the decor, updated the merchandise, and implemented new marketing strategies to attract a fresh wave of customers. "This place is going to be better than ever, Sarah?" Leo beamed as we surveyed our handiwork. "Just you wait and see." And he was right. Within a matter of months, the boutique was thriving once again, a testament to the resilience and determination that had carried me through my darkest days. But my journey didn't end there. As I stood amidst the racks of designer clothing and the sparkling displays, I couldn't help but reflect on the countless women who had found themselves in situations similar to mine, trapped in abusive relationships, stripped of their dignity and independence by the very people who were supposed to love and protect them. It was then that the idea took root, a foundation dedicated to empowering and supporting women who had endured the kind of betrayal and deceit that I had faced, a safe haven where they could rebuild their lives, reclaim their strength, and emerge as the warriors they were always meant to be. With a newfound sense of purpose, I immersed myself in the planning and execution of this ambitious endeavor. I poured my heart and soul into creating a comprehensive support system, complete with legal resources, counseling services, and vocational training programs. The day the foundation's doors opened, I stood before a crowd of supporters, my heart swelling with pride and determination. Too many women have had their voices silenced, their spirits crushed by those who sought to control and exploit them, I declared, my voice ringing out with conviction. But no more. This foundation is a sanctuary, a place where you can find the strength to reclaim your power and forge a new path, one defined by resilience, courage, and an unwavering belief in yourselves. The cheers and applause that followed were deafening, a resounding affirmation that my mission had struck a chord. Women from all walks of life, united in their shared experiences, embraced me with tears of gratitude and hope shining in their eyes. In the months and years that followed, the foundation flourished, becoming a beacon of hope and empowerment for countless women who had endured the unimaginable. I poured my heart and soul into mentoring and guiding them, sharing the lessons I had learned through my own ordeal. And as I stood before each graduating class, watching these remarkable women stride across the stage with their heads held high, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of pride and fulfillment. They were the living embodiments of resilience, proof that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could prevail. As for me, I had embarked on a journey I never could have imagined, one that had taken me from the depths of despair to the heights of personal triumph. The woman I had become was a far cry from the naive, trusting soul who had fallen prey to Graham's machinations. I was a warrior, a survivor, and a beacon of hope for all those who had been wronged. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that my work was far from over. There were countless battles yet to be fought, countless lives to be reclaimed from the shadows of oppression and deceit. But I was ready. Armed with the strength and wisdom born of my experiences, I would continue to forge ahead, lighting the way for others to follow. For in the end, that was the true essence of victory, not just reclaiming what was rightfully mine, but empowering others to do the same. The rusted lock gave way with a sharp tug, the heavy iron door creaking open to reveal a dimly lit space within the decrepit shed. As my eyes adjusted, a faint whimper reached my ears, the unmistakable sound of a child's muffled cries. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" Silence. Steeling my nerves, I stepped inside, the musty air assaulting my senses. Rays of sunlight streamed through cracks in the walls, illuminating a small, huddled figure in the corner. I gasped, covering my mouth to stifle the cry that threatened to escape. It was a young girl, her frail body curled into a tight ball, stringy blonde hair obscuring her face. At the sound of my footsteps, she froze, her cries turning to ragged breaths. "It's okay. I won't hurt you," I said, my words gentle yet firm. "My name is Evelyn. I'm here to help." Slowly, she lifted her head and our eyes met. piercing blue orbs, haunted yet defiant, stared back at me, the gaze of one far older than her years. A surge of recognition washed over me, coupled with disbelief and horror. "Eliza?" I whispered, the name I never thought I'd utter again. "Eliza Carson?" Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her delicate features. Of course, she wouldn't recognize me. We'd never met. Eliza Carson was Clayton's cousin, presumed dead after a boating accident 6 years ago when she was only 6 years old. Her body was never recovered, but the entire community mourned her loss. "How do you know my name?" Her small voice quivered, laced with equal parts fear and desperation. "Eliza, it's me, Evelyn. I'm married to your cousin Clayton." I inched closer, my hands raised in a placating gesture. "You're safe now, I promise. I'll get you out of here." Her eyes widened, realization dawning. "You have to go," she pleaded, shrinking back. "If he finds out, you know—" The shed's entrance slammed open, the force sending a tremor through the floorboards. I whirled around to find Clayton, his expression a mix of shock and trepidation. "Evelyn?" His gaze flickered between us, confusion rapidly giving way to panic. "What are you doing here? Get away from her!" I stood my ground, shielding Eliza with my body. "Clayton, what is going on? Why is your cousin, who everyone thought was dead, locked up in this shed?" His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "You don't understand. It's not what it looks like." "Then explain it to me," I demanded, my voice rising. "Because right now it looks like your family has been lying and keeping a little girl prisoner for God knows how long." Eliza flinched at my outburst, and I softened my tone. "Please, Clayton, she's just a child. Whatever this is about, we need to get her out of here and to safety." Clayton's shoulders slumped, defeated. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words died on his lips as a booming voice echoed from outside. "What in the blazes is going on here?" My blood turned to ice as Terrence Carson, Clayton's uncle and the family patriarch, appeared in the doorway, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over us all. Terrence's eyes narrowed as they settled on Eliza's frail form cowering behind me. A cruel sneer twisted his weathered features. Well, seems the little brat has been discovered." He spat the words like venom. "Didn't think you'd last this long, girl." I tensed, shielding Eliza further from his menacing glare. "What is the meaning of this, Terrence? Why have you been keeping a child locked up like some animal?" He scoffed, unfazed by my accusation. "That's none of your concern, missy. You've stuck your nose where it don't belong." "Like hell it's not my concern," I shot back, fury rising within me. "This is my family, too, and I have a right to know what kind of depravity you've been up to." Terrence advanced, his bulky frame towering over me. "You watch your tone, girl. This is my land, my family. What I do here is my business." Clayton stepped between us, his arms extended. "Uncle Terrence, please. There's no need for this. Let's just take a breath and—" "And what, boy?" Terrence snarled, rounding on his nephew. "You gonna take her side over your own blood, after everything I've done for this family?" Clayton faltered, his eyes flitting between us, torn. Seizing the opportunity, I pressed on. "Clayton, look at me. You know this is wrong. Whatever your uncle's reasons, keeping a child prisoner is unforgivable. We have to get Eliza out of here and to the authorities." Terrence barked a harsh laugh. "The authorities? You think that sheriff buddy of yours will lift a finger against me? I own half this goddamn town, girl. No one's gonna believe the ramblings of some outsider over the word of a Carson." His words chilled me to the bone, but I refused to back down. "We'll see about that. I'm not afraid of you, Terrence. Not anymore." With a surprising burst of strength, I grabbed Eliza's hand and pulled her towards the exit. Terrence made a move to stop us, but Clayton held him back, his expression pained but resolute. As we burst out into the open air, I heard Terrence's roar of fury echoing behind us. "This ain't over, you hear me? You're gonna regret this, Evelyn Carson. I'll make sure of it." We ran, putting as much distance between us in that wretched place as possible. Eliza's small hand trembled in mine, but she didn't slow, her resilience evident despite her ordeal. Finally, we reached the safety of town, and I ushered her into the back of my truck, out of sight. Her wide, haunted eyes met mine, brimming with a mixture of fear and hope. What happens now?" she whispered, her voice small, but laced with steel. I cupped her face gently, determination blazing within me. "Now, we fight back. We're going to expose what Terrence has done, and make sure he can never hurt anyone again." A faint smile tugged at her cracked lips, and she nodded, the first spark of life I'd seen in her since our fateful encounter. As I gunned the engine, peeling out of the sleepy town that harbored such horrors, I knew there was no turning back. Terrence had made it personal, and I would stop at nothing to bring him to justice, both for Eliza's sake and my own. The game was afoot, and I would see this through to the bitter end, no matter what stood in my way. Terrence's reign of terror was about to come crashing down, and God help anyone who tried to stop me. My truck rumbled to a stop outside the sheriff's station, the engine still growling angrily as I killed the ignition. Eliza peered out the window, her small frame tense with apprehension. "It's okay," I said, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Marcus is a good man. He'll help us." She nodded mutely, chewing her lip as we exited the vehicle. The station's double doors swung open, and Marcus himself strode out, a concerned crease etched into his brow. "Evelyn, what's going on?" His gaze landed on Eliza, and his eyes widened. "Is that—" "It's a long story," I replied grimly. "We need to talk, in private." Understanding flashed across his features as he ushered us inside, his demeanor all business. Once sequestered in his office, I wasted no time recounting the harrowing events of the day, from discovering Eliza's confinement to Terrence's menacing threats. Marcus listened intently, his expression darkening with every detail. When I finished, he let out a low whistle, scrubbing a hand over his weathered face. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "I knew Terrence Carson was a piece of work, but this—" He shook his head, disgust etched into his features. "You believe me, then?" I pressed. "You'll help us bring him down?" "Of course I believe you, Evelyn." He reached across his desk, clasping my hand firmly. "You know I've always had your back. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that bastard gets what's coming to him." Relief washed over me at his words, but it was short-lived as another thought occurred to me. What about Eliza's safety? Terrence won't stop until he gets her back under his control. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Leave that to me. I'll set you both up somewhere secure, out of town where he can't get to you." "No." The vehement protest came not from me, but from Eliza herself. We both turned to her, startled by the sudden outburst from the normally timid girl. "I'm not running anymore," she declared, her eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't yet seen. "That monster has kept me locked up, afraid of my own shadow for too long. I want to face him, to make him pay for what he's done." My admiration for her bravery was tempered by concern. "Eliza, I understand how you feel, but nothing," she cut me off fiercely. "I may be just a kid, but I'm stronger than he thinks. You said we were going to fight back, and that's what I want to do." I opened my mouth to protest further, but Marcus held up a hand, silencing me. "She's right, Evelyn." His expression was grim but resolute. "If we want to take Terrence down for good, we'll need Eliza's testimony. She's the key to exposing his crimes and making sure he can't wriggle his way out of this." Eliza lifted her chin defiantly, her jaw set in determination far beyond her years. In that moment, I saw not a frightened child, but a young woman forged in the fires of unimaginable hardship, a kindred spirit with an inner strength to match my own. With a slow nod of acceptance, I turned back to Marcus. "All right, what's our next move?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "First, we need to gather more evidence against Terrence, something concrete to back up Eliza's story. And for that—" He paused, his gaze flickering towards the door. "We'll need to bring in some extra firepower." As if on cue, there was a sharp rap at the office door. Marcus's smile widened as he called out, "Come on in, Nina. We've got work to do." Nina Carson swept into the room like a whirlwind, her sharp features pinched with an expression somewhere between apprehension and distaste. Her piercing gaze settled on me, then Eliza, before flicking back to Marcus. "You weren't kidding," she muttered. "The kid's alive." I bristled at her dismissive tone, but Marcus held up a placating hand. "Nina, you know why I called you here. We need your help taking down your father once and for all." A flicker of emotion passed over her face, a mixture of anger and hurt so fleeting I almost missed it. With a curt nod, she seemed to steel herself, smoothing her features into an impassive mask. "Fine. What do you need from me?" As Marcus laid out the situation, Nina listened stonily, her jaw clenched tight. When he finished, she let out a harsh bark of laughter, shaking her head in disbelief. "Typical dad," she spat. lying, manipulating, doing whatever it takes to maintain his twisted idea of control. Her gaze landed on Eliza, softening ever so slightly. "I'm sorry, kid. You didn't deserve to get caught up in his sick games." Eliza met her stare evenly, her small frame radiating a strength that belied her years. "It's not your fault," she replied, her voice steady. "You're not the one who kept me locked up like an animal for 6 years." An uncomfortable silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken tensions and histories I could only guess at. Finally, Nina broke it with a weary sigh. "You're right. This is on him, not me. Not anymore." Her jaw set in grim determination. "I'll help however I can to take the bastard down. No more lies, no more protecting him. It's time he paid for his crimes." "That's what I like to hear." Marcus clapped his hands together, all business once more. "First things first, we need to gather evidence, anything that can corroborate Eliza's story and prove Terrence was behind her disappearance." "I might be able to help with that," Nina offered, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Dad may be good at covering his tracks, but he's also arrogant as hell. Chances are he's left a trail, however faint, if we know where to look." A thin smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "Then it's a good thing we've got an insider on our side." Nina's lips curved into a matching expression, tinged with a bitterness that spoke volumes. "Believe me, I know all about the Carson family's dirty little secrets. Let's just say dear old Dad wasn't exactly Father of the Year material." As she delved into the sordid details, my anger towards Terrence Carson only intensified, both for Eliza's horrific mistreatment and the web of manipulation he'd spun around his own flesh and blood. This man's villainy knew no bounds, tainting everything and everyone he touched like a malignant blight. But not for much longer. With Marcus's tenacity, Eliza's bravery, and Nina's inside knowledge, we would unravel Terrence's schemes thread by thread until he had nowhere left to hide. Come hell or high water, he would face justice, both for his sake and mine. When Nina finished her grim recounting, I turned to Marcus, my expression hardening with resolve. "Where do we start?" The sheriff leaned back in his chair, a feral glint in his eye. "At the beginning, we're going to dig into every inch of Terrence's life, turn over every rock until we find the proof to bury that son of a bitch for good." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing grimly. "Whatever it takes." The Carson family estate loomed ahead, its wrought iron gates an imposing barrier guarding the secrets that lurked within. Nina gripped the steering wheel tightly as we approached, her knuckles white with tension. "You sure about this, Evelyn?" she asked, her voice tight. "There's no going back after we cross that line." I eyed the foreboding manor, feeling its dark presence like a weight pressing down on me. "I'm sure. It's time we got some answers, straight from the devil's mouth." Nina gave a grim nod before punching in the code, the gates grinding open with a piercing shriek of metal on metal. We pulled through, the tires crunching over the gravel drive as we neared the main house. Lorraine Carson was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. As we climbed out of the car, her pinched expression softened briefly at the sight of her daughter. "Nina, what are you doing here?" Her gaze landed on me, eyes narrowing to slits. "And you brought her? After everything that's happened?" "That's exactly why we're here, Mother," Nina replied coolly. "We know what Dad's been up to, about Eliza. It's over." Lorraine flinched as if struck, panic flitting across her features before being hastily masked by a stony facade. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Can it, Mom?" Nina snapped, her patience clearly waning. "The lying, the cover-ups, it all stops now. We're going to take that sick bastard down, and you're either with us or against us." A tense silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history and roiling emotions. Finally, Lorraine's shoulders sagged in defeat. "You always did have a way of cutting through the bullshit, Nina." She sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 53 years. "I suppose I can't keep denying it any longer." Gesturing for us to follow, she led the way inside, her measured steps echoing hollowly through the cavernous foyer. My gaze swept over the opulent trappings, gilded mirrors, priceless antiques, and not a single personal touch to be seen. Like a museum frozen in time, devoid of warmth or life. How fitting for the Carson family. Lorraine ushered us into a dimly lit study, the heavy drapes drawn against the dying sun outside. A glass of amber liquid sat untouched on the mahogany desk, a telltale sign of its occupant's recent presence. At our entrance, Terence rose from the worn leather armchair, his expression thunderous. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he growled, his eyes flicking between Nina and me with undisguised contempt. "I don't recall inviting you piranhas into my home." "Can it, Terence?" Lorraine said, her voice low but laced with a surprising venom. "We're done with your lies, your deceptions. It's time we settled this, once and for all." For a fraction of a second, a flicker of unease passed over Terence's craggy features. There and gone so quickly, I wondered if I'd imagined it. Just as swiftly, the mask of arrogance slammed back into place, his lips curling into a contemptuous sneer. "So the family betrayers have come to rally against me, have they?" He shook his head with a mocking chuckle. "You're welcome to try, but you'll find I'm not so easily cowed." "We'll see about that," I bit out, barely containing my fury. "We know what you did to Eliza, you twisted son of a bitch. Keeping a child locked up like an animal for your own sick gratification? That's a new low, even for you." His gaze locked with mine, cold and unflinching. "You have no idea what you're talking about, girl. Everything I've done, everything, has been for the preservation and protection of this family's legacy." Terence's words hung in the air like a noxious cloud, his twisted justification chilling me to the core. Before I could formulate a response, Nina stepped forward, her eyes blazing with barely contained rage. "That's enough of your rationalizations, you sick fuck," she spat. "We're done playing by your rules. Eliza is safe, the jig is up, and you're going to pay for what you've done." A muscle twitched in Terence's jaw, the first crack in his impassive facade. "You ungrateful little bitch," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. "After everything I've sacrificed for this family, this is how you repay me?" "Sacrificed?" Nina let out a harsh bark of laughter. "Is that what you call systematically destroying us from the inside out? Alienating Mom? Driving me away with your toxic vitriol? Wake up, you delusional bastard. The only thing you've ever cared about is maintaining your twisted power trip." I could see the fury building in Terence like a raging inferno, his body practically vibrating with the effort of restraining it. When he spoke again, his tone was soft, almost gentle. "Nina, you have no idea the things I've had to do to preserve our legacy, the sacrifices, the difficult choices." His gaze bored into her, sharp as flint. "You think I wanted to do what I did to Eliza, that I took pleasure in it?" The air left my lungs in a shocked rush. Terence's admission hung there, visceral and horrifying. Nina looked equally sickened, her skin taking on an ashen pallor. You monster," she choked out. "How could you?" "How could I?" Terence roared, the floodgates finally bursting open. "That sniveling brat was a liability, a blight on our family's good name. She had to be dealt with, made to disappear for the greater good." My hands curled into white-knuckled fists at my sides as a wave of revulsion crashed over me. This man's depravity knew no bounds, not even when it came to his own flesh and blood. "So you admit it," I bit out through gritted teeth. "You're the one who made Eliza disappear, then kept her locked up like a prisoner all these years." A cruel smile twisted Terence's lips. "Give the girl a prize. Yes, I orchestrated the whole thing. The boating accident, the fake investigation, all of it. And you want to know the real kicker?" He leaned forward, his eyes glittering with perverse glee. "Her own sniveling parents were in on it from the start." A startled gasp from Lorraine was the only sound in the deafening silence that followed. Nina looked utterly shell-shocked, her mouth working soundlessly as she struggled to process her father's horrific revelation. It was Marcus who finally broke the stillness, his voice hard as tempered steel. "That's more than enough confession." With a deft movement, he had his sidearm leveled squarely at Terence's chest, his expression utterly devoid of mercy. "Terence Carson, you're under arrest for the kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and endangerment of a minor. You have the right to remain silent." As Marcus recited the Miranda rights, cuffing the now ranting Terence with practiced efficiency, I caught Nina's eye across the room. The anguish and betrayal etched on her features said it all, the last thread of family loyalty severed for good. No matter what came next, there would be no coming back from this day. Terence's web of lies and manipulation had finally been laid bare, the depth of his evil exposed for all to see. My path was clear now, forged in the fires of this hard-won truth. By whatever means necessary, I would ensure Terrence faced the full weight of justice for his unspeakable crimes. If it was the last thing I did, he would pay. The courthouse was a madhouse, swarming with reporters and gawkers, desperate for a glimpse of the sordid drama about to unfold. I pushed my way through the throngs, Eliza's small hand clutched tightly in mine as we forged a path towards the imposing oak doors. "Just keep your head down," I murmured, shielding her from the flashing cameras and shouted questions. "It'll be over soon." She gave a tiny nod, her jaw set in a determined line far beyond her years. Despite her diminutive stature, she carried herself with a quiet strength that never failed to fill me with awe and a fierce protectiveness. No matter what, I would ensure Terrence Carson paid for what he'd done to this remarkable girl. The courtroom itself was mercifully hushed, the air thick with tension as we filed in alongside the prosecution. My gaze immediately found Terrence, seated ramrod straight at the defendant's table, his expression one of haughty disdain. Our eyes locked for a brief moment, a silent challenge passing between us. A cruel smirk curved his thin lips, sending an icy shiver down my spine. That twisted son of a bitch was up to something. I could feel it in my bones. As the proceedings got underway, I found my attention divided between the testimonies and Terrence's every-minute shift and reaction. He remained infuriatingly inscrutable, betraying none of the turmoil that must have been roiling beneath that impeccably composed facade. It wasn't until Eliza was called to the stand that the first hairline fractures began to show. She was so small up there, positively dwarfed by the imposing witness box. But when she lifted her head and fixed Terrence with those haunted blue eyes, there was an unshakable resolve blazing within them that defied her fragile stature. "Tell us, Miss Carson," the prosecutor prompted gently. "In your own words, what happened the night you disappeared 6 years ago?" A hushed stillness descended over the courtroom as Eliza drew a fortifying breath. When she spoke, her voice rang out clear and unwavering. "It was my uncle, Terrence. He took me from my parents' house late one night, told me we were going on a secret adventure." She recounted the harrowing tale in disturbing detail, the staged boating accident, the wrath hole in which she'd been imprisoned all these years, the mind games and emotional torment at Terrence's hands. With every new revelation, I could see the cracks in Terrence's composure deepening, his knuckles whitening around the arms of his chair. And he said I had to stay hidden, that no one could know I was alive, not even my own parents. Eliza's voice began to waver, but she pressed on with heart-rending bravery. He said it was for the good of the family. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the most hardened observers seemed shaken by the graphic injustice laid bare before them, all except Terrence. As Eliza was finally excused, his booming voice rang out, shattering the somber silence like a thunderclap. "You little lying bitch!" Before anyone could react, he'd surged to his feet, teeth bared in an animalistic snarl as he lunged towards the witness stand, and Eliza. A collective gasp went up from the gallery, but I was already in motion, hurling myself bodily between the raging monster and his target. His hands found my throat, cutting off my airway with bruising force as we crashed backwards. Black spots danced across my vision, but I clawed desperately at his vice-like grip, a primal surge of adrenaline propelling me. "Not this time, you bastard. Not her. Not my family." Distantly, I was aware of pandemonium erupting around us, shouting, scuffling, the distant wail of sirens. But all that existed in that moment was the furious pounding of my heart, the burning need for air, and Terrence's pitiless face looming over me, twisted in a sadistic leer of triumph. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure was gone. I sucked in a ragged gasp, blinking against the dark blot still obscuring my sight. When my vision finally cleared, I saw Terrence being swarmed by a sea of bodies, dragging his thrashing form away as he spewed vile curses and threats. Marcus was there, features set in a mask of cold fury as he slapped the cuffs back on the raving man's wrists. And in the eye of the storm's aftermath stood Eliza, gazing at me with those wise, haunted eyes, the eyes of one who had witnessed the true depths of human cruelty, yet emerged from the abyss unbowed. As our eyes met, a silent understanding passed between us. No matter what it took, we had won this day. Terrence Carson's reign of terror was over. The rain fell in a soft drizzle, misting the air with a gentle haze as I made my way down the familiar dirt path. Overhead, the iron-gray clouds parted enough to allow a few feeble rays of sunlight to pierce through, bathing the Carson family cemetery in a somber glow. I'd been here too many times over the past year, first for Clayton's mother Lorraine's funeral after her untimely passing, then for the hearings and sentencing that finally saw Terrence put behind bars for the rest of his natural life. Each visit had been more somber than the last, the weight of this place's history like a shroud draped over my shoulders. But not today. Today, I carried a renewed sense of purpose, a lift in my step that had been sorely missing for far too long. As I neared the secluded corner where the newest addition lay, a small figure came into view, sitting cross-legged before the simple granite headstone. "There you are," I called out softly, unable to keep the faint smile from tugging at my lips. "I was wondering where you'd gotten off to." Eliza turned, her face breaking into a warm smile that still managed to take my breath away after all this time. In the 2 years since her harrowing rescue and Terrence's downfall, she'd blossomed from a haunted waif into a vibrant, healthy young woman, her eyes shining with a light I'd once feared was extinguished forever. "Sorry, I just needed a moment," she replied, her gaze drifting back to the gravestone with a wistful expression. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes, you know? After everything." I settled onto the damp grass beside her, draping an arm around her shoulders. She immediately leaned into my embrace with a contented sigh. "I know it's been an incredible adjustment after what that monster put you through," I murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the crown of her head. "But you've handled it with more strength and grace than anyone could have hoped for, sweetheart. You're an inspiration to us all." A faint blush colored her cheeks at the praise, but her lips curved upwards in that radiant smile once more. "I had a good role model," she said simply, reaching out to grasp my free hand in her slender fingers. "If it wasn't for you, Evelyn, I might have never." Her voice trailed off, but I could hear the unspoken meaning loud and clear. I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, a silent promise that those nightmarish days were firmly in the past now. "Well, you'll never have to worry about that again," I assured her fiercely. "Terrence is gone for good, and the rest of us, we're going to be just fine." We lapsed into a comfortable silence, turning our attention back to the gravestone and the words etched into its timeless surface. "In memory of Eliza Carson, beloved daughter, cousin, and friend, may you forever rest in peace." So much pain, so much heartache had stemmed from those 5 simple words, a tragic lie perpetrated by a deeply disturbed man blinded by his own greed and depravity. But in the end, it was a truth that had set Eliza free from her suffering, giving her a new lease on the life that had nearly been stolen away. A gentle breeze rustled the trees overhead, carrying the first hints of spring, of new beginnings and fresh starts. I watched contentedly as the wind tousled Eliza's golden tresses, her face tilted towards the pale sunlight filtering through the clouds like a flower unfurling its petals. There was still healing to be done, scars that may never fully fade. But in that moment, bathed in nature's delicate renewal, I felt a profound sense of peace and hope, our future. The nightmare was finally over. It was time to awaken to the world anew. As Eliza and I rose, hand in hand, to make our way back home, I silently vowed that from this day forward, we would embrace each moment with open hearts and minds. No longer shackled by the shadows of Terrence's malice, we would bask in the warm glow of hard-won justice and dare to dream of what lay ahead. A new dawn was on the horizon, burning bright and radiant with possibilities, and we would greet it together, unafraid.
I never expected a simple piece of paper to shatter my carefully constructed peace. But there it was, pinned to my front door with a black thumbtack, stark white against the dark wood, fluttering slightly in the autumn breeze. "This isn't over," it read in messy block letters. 3 words that sent ice through my veins and brought my past rushing back like a tidal wave. My name is Lila, and until today I thought I'd finally built the quiet life I'd always dreamed of. A cozy craftsman house in a peaceful neighborhood, a loving partner, and a job at the local library where the biggest drama usually involved overdue books. But that note changed everything. I stood there, keys dangling forgotten in my hand, staring at those 3 words until they burned into my memory. The street behind me was quiet, almost too quiet. Mrs. Peterson's wind chimes next door tinkled softly, and somewhere down the block, a dog barked. Normal sounds that suddenly felt ominous. My phone buzzed, making me jump. It was Ethan, my partner. "Hey babe, grabbing takeout from Ming's. Want your usual?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, that sounds good." I paused, debating whether to tell him about the note. "How long until you're home?" 20 minutes, tops. "Everything okay?" "You sound weird." "Just tired," I lied, hating myself for it. "See you soon." I pulled the thumbtack out and brought the note inside, laying it on our kitchen counter. The paper was cheap, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. Nothing distinctive about it except for those threatening words and what they represented. My hands shook as I poured myself a glass of water. I knew exactly who had left this message. Ryan, Ethan's younger brother, had been acting strange ever since we inherited this house from Ethan's grandmother 6 months ago. He'd made snide comments about how unfair it was, how he and his wife Vanessa deserved it more. But I never thought he'd escalate things like this. The last family dinner replayed in my mind. Ryan's cold stare across the table, Vanessa's sugary sweet voice asking pointed questions about our renovation plans. "It must be nice," she'd said, twirling her wine glass, "having such a beautiful home just given to you." I'd spent years learning to control my reactions, to stay calm in the face of provocation. My past as a martial arts champion taught me that much, at least. But standing in my kitchen, staring at that note, I felt my carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. The sound of a car door slamming made me quickly shove the note into a drawer. Ethan walked in moments later, carrying bags of Chinese food and wearing his usual easy smile. "Got you extra spring rolls," he said, setting everything down and pulling me into a hug. I melted into his embrace, breathing in his familiar scent of coffee and cologne. Should I tell him? Would he believe me over his own brother? Questions churned in my stomach, souring my appetite. "You sure you're okay?" Ethan pulled back, studying my face with concern. "You look pale." The words caught in my throat as headlights swept across our front windows. Car was driving by slowly, too slowly. Through the curtains, I caught a glimpse of Ryan's black SUV. "Actually," I said, making a decision, "there's something we need to talk about." But before I could continue, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Hope you enjoyed my little message." There's more where that came from. The peaceful life I'd built was unraveling, and I had a choice to make. I could stay quiet and hope this would blow over, or I could fight back. As I looked at Ethan's worried face, I realized there really wasn't a choice at all. I'd fought too hard for this life to let anyone take it from me, even if that someone was family. I showed Ethan the note over our cooling Chinese food. His face darkened as he read it, then read it again. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. "You think Ryan did this?" He finally looked up, his expression a mix of doubt and worry that made my stomach clench. "Who else would it be?" I pushed my untouched spring rolls around with my chopsticks. "You saw how he acted at the reading of the will. How he's been acting ever since." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd grown to recognize. "Ryan can be difficult but threatening notes? That's not his style." "Then whose style is it?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Because someone clearly has a problem with us being in this house. Maybe we should." Ethan was cut off by the sound of tires on gravel. Through our dining room window, I watched Ryan's black SUV pull into our driveway. Again. "Perfect timing," I muttered, standing up. But Ethan caught my wrist. "Let me handle this," he said softly. "He's my brother." That's exactly the problem, I wanted to say. Instead, I nodded and followed him to the door. Ryan and Vanessa stood on our porch like they owned it. Vanessa wore her usual perfectly coordinated outfit and artificial smile, while Ryan lounged against the railing with forced casualness. "Hope we're not interrupting dinner," Vanessa chirped, peering past us into the house. "We were just driving by and thought we'd stop in. For the second time today." "Actually, we were in the middle of something," I started, but Ethan was already stepping aside to let them in. "No problem," he said. "Come on in." I watched them walk into my home, our home, and felt my martial arts training kick in automatically. Analyzing positions, watching movements, staying aware of exits. Old hobbits die hard. "Love what you've done with Grandma's china cabinet," Vanessa said, running her finger along the antique wood. "Though it's such a shame to change anything. This house has so much history." The way she emphasized that last word made my skin crawl. "What brings you by?" I asked directly, ignoring Ethan's warning glance. Ryan sprawled on our couch, his boots on our coffee table. Can a guy visit his big brother? Besides, Vanessa and I have been talking about the neighborhood, thinking about maybe moving closer. Closer? The word stuck in my throat. Vanessa nodded, still wandering the room like a realtor sizing up a property. "This street has such potential. The right people could really make something of these old houses." I caught the emphasis on right people and felt my hands curl into fists. Ethan must have noticed because he quickly jumped in. "That's great, but maybe we could discuss this another time?" Lila and I were actually in the middle of an important conversation. "Oh." Ryan's eyes locked onto mine. "Anything interesting?" The note burned in my pocket where I'd stuffed it earlier. I met his stare, remembering years of competition, of knowing exactly when someone was testing my defenses. "Just house stuff," I said evenly. "Speaking of which, how's that fixer-upper you bought last year coming along?" Vanessa's smile flickered. Their investment property had turned into a money pit, and everyone knew it. "It's progressing," she said tightly. "Though some people just have all the luck, don't they? Getting a move-in ready house just handed to them." Tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Ethan shifted uncomfortably between us, torn between family loyalty and defending our home. "Nothing was handed to us," I said quietly. "Grandma Carter made her choice." "Did she?" Ryan stood suddenly. "Or did someone help her make it?" "Ryan," Ethan warned, but his brother was already heading for the door, Vanessa close behind. "Thanks for the lovely visit," she called over her shoulder. "We should do this more often. After all, we're family." After they left, Ethan and I stood in silence, listening to their car pull away. Chinese food was completely cold now, forgotten on the kitchen counter. "Still think Ryan didn't write that note?" I asked. Ethan didn't answer, and somehow that hurt more than any threat could. The next morning at the library, I found another note tucked inside the book I'd been reading during my lunch break. "You don't belong here." Never did. The handwriting matched the first note perfectly. My hands trembled as I stared at the words. Someone had been watching me, waiting for the right moment. Quiet sanctuary of my workplace suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. "Earth to Lila." Mia's voice made me jump. She peered over my shoulder, her usual cheerful expression falling as she caught sight of the note. "What's that?" I quickly folded the paper and shoved it into my pocket. "Nothing." "Just." "Don't you dare say nothing." Mia pulled me into the biography section, away from prying eyes. "You've been jumpy all morning, and now this?" "Talk to me." Before I could respond, the sharp click of heels on hardwood announced Vanessa's arrival. She rounded the corner like she owned the place, designer purse swinging from her arm. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The librarians having their little chat. "We're working," I said flatly, turning away. "Oh, I'm sure you are." Vanessa's voice dropped lower. "Working on how to keep that house, right? Must be exhausting, always looking over your shoulder." My spine stiffened. Mia stepped closer to me, protective. "Is there something we can help you find, Vanessa?" Mia asked pointedly. Actually, yes. Vanessa pulled out a thick folder. I've been researching property laws. Fascinating stuff. Did you know there are all sorts of ways a will can be questioned? The threat hung in the air between us. I thought of Grandma Carter's final months. How she'd insisted I move in to help care for her while Ryan and Vanessa were too busy with their investment opportunities. The will was perfectly legal, I said quietly. Everything was witnessed and notarized. Legal doesn't always mean right. Vanessa leafed through her folder. For instance, when an elderly woman suddenly changes her will after her grandson's girlfriend moves in, well, people might wonder about undue influence. My chest tightened. Is that what you're telling people? I'm not telling anyone anything. Her smile turned predatory. Yet? That's enough. Mia's voice was sharp. This is a library, not a courthouse. Take your threats somewhere else. Vanessa's facade cracked for just a moment, revealing something desperate underneath. You think you've won, don't you? Playing the perfect caretaker, the devoted granddaughter-in-law? Some of us had to work for everything we have. Like that falling apart house you can't afford to fix? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Vanessa slammed the folder down on a nearby table, making several patrons jump. You have no idea what it's like, watching everything handed to you while we struggle. That house should have been split equally. Ryan is family. You're just convenient. The old me would have responded differently. Would have shown her exactly how convenient I could be. Instead, I took a slow, steady breath. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Or what? She stepped closer. You'll call security? Have me banned from the public library? That would make a great story for the neighborhood gossips. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Ethan wondering why I wasn't answering his texts. But I couldn't look away from Vanessa's challenge. You want the truth? I kept my voice low. Grandma Carter left us the house because she knew what you and Ryan would do with it. Flip it for quick cash like every other property you've ruined. She wanted it preserved, not destroyed. Color flooded Vanessa's cheeks. For a moment, I thought she might actually strike me. Instead, she gathered her folder with shaking hands. This isn't over, she hissed, the exact words from the first note. After she stormed out, Mia grabbed my arm. Okay, spill. What's really going on? I pulled out both notes, watching my friend's eyes widen as she read them. Have you told Ethan? He doesn't want to believe his brother could do this. I leaned against the shelves, suddenly exhausted. And maybe he's right. Maybe I'm paranoid. Or maybe, Mia said slowly, you need to stop playing nice and start playing smart. She was right. I'd been trying so hard to leave my past behind, to be the perfect partner and librarian, that I'd forgotten something crucial. Sometimes peace comes at a price. And I knew exactly how to make them pay it. After the confrontation at the library, I spent hours researching Ryan and Vanessa's failed property ventures. Public records told a story of mounting debt and desperate refinancing. But it was a social media notification that made my blood run cold. Someone had tagged Vanessa in photos from my old competition days. They knew. I stared at the images of my younger self on the martial arts circuit, trophies in hand, victory written across my face. The life I'd walked away from was now ammunition in their hands. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Nice roundhouse kick. Shame about that career-ending injury. Or was it? The walls of our cozy living room suddenly felt like they were closing in. I hadn't told Ethan everything about my past, about why I'd really left competitive fighting. Some secrets were better left buried. The front door opened and I quickly closed the browser. Ethan walked in, looking troubled. Ryan called, he said, dropping his keys on the counter. He wants to meet. Says he has information about the house that might interest us. What kind of information? He wouldn't say. Just that it's important. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. Maybe we should hear him out. Like we've heard him out about his last investment opportunity? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. The one that cost you $5,000? That was different. But his shoulders sagged. He's still my brother, Lila. Before I could respond, another text came through. Ask Ethan about the original will. The one from before you moved in. My heart stopped. Ethan, I said carefully. Was there another will? His silence was answer enough. Why didn't you tell me? Because it doesn't matter. He finally looked at me. Grandma changed it legally. She wanted you to have this place. But originally it was supposed to go to Ryan, wasn't it? A knock at the door saved him from answering. Through the window, I saw a familiar face I hadn't seen in years. Jax Reynolds, my old training partner. Expecting someone? Then asked. I shook my head, moving to open the door. Jax stood there, looking more polished than I remembered in a business suit, but with the same calculating eyes. Long time no see, champ, he said easily. Mind the ficomean. Then tensed beside me. Who's this? An old friend, I said, though friend wasn't exactly the right word. What are you doing here, Jax? He stepped inside, taking in our home with an appraising look. Heard you might need some help. Ryan Carter's been asking questions about you around town. Interesting questions. My stomach dropped. What kind of questions? The kind that make me think he's digging for dirt. Jax's smile was sharp. Good thing I know where all the bodies are buried, right? Then moved closer to me. Is that a threat? Actually, Jax pulled out his business card, Community Development Director. It's an offer of help. Ryan's been trying to push through some questionable permits for his properties. It would be a shame if someone looked too closely at those applications. I studied my old teammate, trying to read his angle. Why would you help me? Let's just say I owe you one. His eyes flickered to my left knee, the injury that ended everything. And I don't like bullies. Another text buzzed in my pocket. Time's running out. Meet tonight or the truth comes out. I looked between Ethan's worried face and Jax's knowing smirk. The past and present were colliding, and I had to choose, keep playing defense or finally strike back. Tell me about those permits, I said to Jax. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. An offense? That was something I knew very well. Lila, Ethan started, but I held up my hand. No more secrets, I said firmly. From any of us. It's time to end this. The weight of my past pressed against my chest, but for the first time since finding that first note, I felt steady. Ready. Let them come. I wasn't looking for a fight when I went for my evening run, but there was Ryan, leaning against my car in the library parking lot after closing. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty lot. Perfect timing for an ambush. Thought you'd want these back, he said, holding up a stack of photographs. Even from several feet away, I recognized them, shots from my competition days, including one from my last match. The one that ended everything. Where did you get those? I kept my voice steady, though my heart raced. Amazing what you can find online. He flipped through them casually. You were quite the champion. Until that unfortunate accident. His smile turned cruel. Or should I say arrangement? My hands curled into fists. What do you want, Ryan? Detrut. He pushed off my car, moving closer. About how you manipulated my grandmother. About the real reason you quit fighting. About everything. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? He pulled out his phone. Because I have some interesting messages here from your old sponsor. He remembers that night very clearly. The memory flashed unbidden, the pressure to throw the fight, the threats, the choice I made that cost me everything. Everything except my integrity. Is that what this is about? I stepped forward. You're trying to blackmail me? I prefer to think of it as negotiation. Ryan's confidence wavered slightly as I moved closer. The house for your secrets. Simple trade. Nothing's ever simple with you. I was close enough now to see the sweat on his forehead. Does Ethan know you're here? Ethan needs to understand what kind of person you really are. That's when I saw Vanessa in her SUV, phone raised, recording everything. Of course, they wanted me to snap to prove I was still violent, still dangerous. But I wasn't that person anymore. Or at least I thought I wasn't. Last chance, Ryan said, dropping the photos at my feet. Sign over the house or everyone learns the truth. I looked at the scattered photos, at my younger self frozen in moments of victory. Then I looked at Ryan, really looked at him, the desperate gleam in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. He was terrified. You want the truth? Kept my voice low, controlled. Here it is. I didn't manipulate your grandmother. She saw through you both long before I came along. She knew about the gambling debts, the failed schemes, the money you borrowed from her savings. Ryan's face paled. That's a lie. Is it? Should we ask Jax about those permit applications? The ones with forged signatures? He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You don't know anything. Years of training kicked in automatically. One fluid movement and Ryan was on the ground, my knee pressed firmly between his shoulder blades. I heard Vanessa scream, car doors slamming. I know everything, I said quietly, holding him down with minimal effort. Every debt, every scheme, every lie. Your grandmother knew too. That's why she changed her will. Let him go. Vanessa was running towards us, phone still recording. You're proving everything we said about you. I released Ryan and stepped back, keeping my stance ready. He scrambled up, face red with rage and humiliation. You're done, he spat. When Ethan sees this. When I see what? We all turned. Ethan stood at the edge of the lot, expression unreadable. Behind him was Jax, holding a thick folder. Perfect timing, Jax said, smiling. I was just coming to discuss those permit applications with Ryan. And look, we have witnesses. Color drained from Ryan's face. Vanessa's phone lowered slowly. Ethan, Ryan started, but his brother held up a hand. I saw everything, he said quietly. And I heard everything. He moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. It's over, Ryan. All of it. Choice I'd made years ago, to walk away rather than compromise my principles, had cost me a career. But standing there, feeling Ethan's support, seeing Ryan and Vanessa's schemes crumbling, I knew I'd make the same choice again. Sometimes the biggest victories come from knowing when not to fight. But sometimes you have to show them exactly what you're capable of. Carter family gathering felt more like a powder keg waiting to explode. I watched from our kitchen as relatives filled the backyard, their cheerful conversations masking the tension underneath. Ethan squeezed my hand, a silent reminder that we had a plan. But plans have a way of falling apart. Ready? He asked, checking his phone where Jax's message waited. Documents in hand. On my way. I nodded, though my stomach churned. After the parking lot incident, Ryan and Vanessa had gone suspiciously quiet. Too quiet. Well, isn't this cozy? Vanessa's voice cut through the crowd as she and Ryan approached. She carried a thick manila envelope that made my skin crawl. Family all together, just like old times. Ryan wouldn't meet our eyes, but something in his stance set off warning bells in my head. He looked satisfied, like someone who knew they'd already won. Before everyone sits down, Vanessa announced loudly, we have something to share. She pulled documents from her envelope. Some interesting information about dear Lila's past. The chatter died down. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me. Vanessa, Ethan started, but she spoke over him. Did you know your sweet librarian was involved in illegal betting? That she took money to throw fights? She smiled coldly. We have proof. My chest tightened. That's not. And that's not all, Ryan finally spoke, his voice carrying across the yard. We found something else. About Grandma's last days. Ethan stiffened beside me. This wasn't part of the plan. Turns out, Ryan continued, there were some interesting withdrawals from her accounts. Large ones. Right around the time Lila moved in to help care for her. The accusations hung in the air like poison. I saw doubt creep into the relatives' faces, heard their whispers. "Show them the rest," Vanessa urged her husband, pulling out more papers. About how she manipulated. "Stop." Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "Just stop." "Why?" Ryan challenged. "Afraid of the truth? About how your girlfriend stole what should have been mine." I waited for Ethan to defend me, to reveal what we knew about Ryan's schemes. Instead, he hesitated just for a moment. But that moment was enough. "Ethan," I whispered. He looked between me and his brother, torn. "I need to see those documents." The ground seemed to shift under my feet. After everything, after the parking lot, after all our planning, he still doubted me? "You don't need to see anything," I said quietly. "You just need to trust me." But he was already reaching for the papers Vanessa held out triumphantly. The same papers we'd planned to expose as forgeries when Jax arrived. My phone buzzed. "Accident on May. Delayed 20 minutes. Hold them off." Too late. "Oh my," Vanessa gasped theatrically as she read over Ethan's shoulder. "These bank records." "Lila, how could you?" The documents were lies. I knew they were lies. But watching Ethan's face change as he read them, seeing the doubt creep in despite everything we'd been through. "I can explain," I started, but the words felt hollow. How do you explain away carefully crafted lies when the truth sounds just as unbelievable? Ryan moved closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You should have taken the deal. Now you lose everything." I looked around at the judging faces, at Ethan still reading those poison papers, at the home I'd fought so hard to protect. Everything I'd built, everything I'd changed about myself, crumbling because of carefully constructed lies. "I trusted you," Ethan finally said, his voice breaking. "After everything with Ryan, I chose you." "You still can," I whispered. "Just wait." "For what?" Ryan interrupted. "More lies. More manipulation." Crowd had grown silent, watching the drama unfold. I saw phones recording, faces I'd grown to love now twisted with suspicion and judgment. In that moment, I realized something terrible. Sometimes the truth doesn't matter. Sometimes the story people want to believe is stronger than reality. I turned and walked away, leaving behind the whispers, the accusations, and the man I loved still holding papers that told lies about me. Sometimes walking away isn't surrender, it's survival. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because while they were all focused on destroying my reputation, they'd forgotten something crucial. I hadn't survived this long by playing nice. I was halfway to my car when Jax's voice cut through the murmur of the gathering. "Those are interesting documents you've got there, Ryan. Mind if I take a look?" Crowd parted as Jax strode through, briefcase in hand, looking more like a prosecutor than a community development director. I turned back, watching Ryan's confident smirk falter. "This is a private family matter," Vanessa said quickly, trying to gather the papers. "Oh, I think it's very public." Jax opened his briefcase. "Especially considering these forged permit applications with Ryan's signature. And these bank records showing mysterious deposits right after Grandma Carter's jewelry went missing." The whispers shifted. I saw heads turning, expressions changing. "That's ridiculous," Ryan sputtered. "You can't prove." "Actually, I can." Jax pulled out more documents. "See, when you started digging into Lila's past, you caught the attention of some interesting people. People who remembered your gambling debts, Ryan. People who kept very detailed records." Ethan stepped forward, the false documents forgotten in his hands. "What gambling debts?" "Tell them, Ryan," I said quietly. "Tell them about the real reason you need this house so badly." Ryan's face had gone pale. Vanessa grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. Don't say anything. They're bluffing. Am I? Jax turned to the crowd. Mrs. Peterson, remember when your wedding rings disappeared during that dinner party? The one where Ryan helped clean up. The elderly neighbor gasped, hands flying to her chest. That's enough. Ryan lunged forward, but I was ready. One swift movement and he was on his knees, arm locked behind him, not hurting, just contained. Years of training made it look effortless. The truth, Ryan, I said firmly. All of it. Now. You don't understand, he gasped. The debts. They were going to hurt Vanessa. I had to do something. So you stole from your own grandmother? Ethan's voice cracked. From our neighbors? I was going to pay it back. Ryan struggled against my hold. Once we got the house, we could sell it, start fresh. But you, he glared at me, you ruined everything. No, Ryan. I released him carefully. You did that yourself. Vanessa suddenly laughed, a sharp, desperate sound. You want the truth? Fine. We're broke. Worse than broke. Every property we bought is worthless. Every investment failed. And there you were, living in our house, playing happy families. It was never your house, a new voice said. We all turned to see Mia holding up her phone. And I have Grandma Carter's last video message to prove it. The screen showed the elderly woman in her hospital bed, clear-eyed and determined. I'm leaving the house to Ethan and Lila because they love it like I do. They'll preserve it, not sell it for quick cash like Ryan wants. I know about the stealing, the gambling. I'm not angry, just disappointed. The house needs protectors, not profiteers. Silence fell over the gathering. Ryan slumped, defeated. Vanessa's perfect mask cracked, tears streaming down her face. I trusted you, Ethan said to his brother. Even when the evidence was right in front of me, I wanted to believe in you. I never meant. Ryan stopped, looking lost. I didn't know how to ask for help. You still could, I said softly. But it starts with the truth. All of it. Ryan looked at me, then at Jax's documents, then at his wife. Something shifted in his expression, resignation, maybe, or relief. Okay, he whispered. Okay. As Ryan began to speak, confessing everything, I felt Ethan's hand slip into mine. An apology, an acknowledgement, a promise. Sometimes victory isn't about winning the fight. Sometimes it's about giving your opponent the chance to surrender with dignity. To choose truth over pride. I'd learned that lesson the hard way years ago in the ring. Now, watching Ryan finally face his demons, I realized that maybe some fights are won not by striking, but by standing firm until the truth has nowhere else to hide. The house would stay ours, but more importantly, the truth would stay too, all of it, mine and Ryan's both. 'Cause sometimes the only way forward is to stop running from your past and learn to walk with it instead. 6 months after the confrontation, I found another note in our mailbox. My hands didn't shake this time as I opened it, though my heart skipped when I recognized Ryan's handwriting. We're in Seattle now, it read. Starting over. Really starting over. Thank you for not pressing charges. For giving us a chance to make things right. I sat on our porch swing, the same spot where this all began, and finished reading. Ryan had entered rehab for his gambling addiction. Vanessa was working at a real estate firm, legitimately this time. They were in therapy, both together and separately. Everything okay? Ethan appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. Old hobbits die hard. Your brother wrote. I handed him the letter. They're doing better. He read in silence, then settled beside me on the swing. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of Mrs. Peterson's roses. She'd finally forgiven us for all the drama after Ryan returned her wedding rings, along with a heartfelt apology. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly. Showing mercy instead of pressing charges? I thought about that moment after Ryan's confession when everyone expected me to demand justice, to make them pay for every threat, every lie. Instead, I'd offered a choice: face the consequences legally or take the chance to rebuild their lives somewhere else. No, I said finally. Some fights aren't worth winning if the victory costs too much. Ethan nodded, understanding what I meant. His relationship with Ryan was different now, cautious, fragile, but healing. Like a broken bone that needed time to mend properly. Jax called today, he mentioned, changing the subject. The community center wants you to teach self-defense classes. Said something about putting your skills to better use than throwing his brother-in-law around parking lots. I laughed, surprising myself. The sound echoed across our front yard, where neighborhood kids now played freely, no longer afraid of the scary librarian with the mysterious past. Maybe I will, I mused. It might be time to stop hiding who I am. You never had to hide, Ethan said softly. I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you did. Before I could respond, a car pulled into our driveway. Mia stepped out, carrying a folder of library event plans, while Jax followed with takeout bags. Family dinner? Mia called out, waving the folder. We can plan the summer reading program while we eat. Family. The words settled warmly in my chest. Not just Ethan now, but Mia and Jax too. Even Mrs. Peterson, who'd taken to leaving her famous apple pies on our porch every Sunday. As we moved inside, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Not just the librarian, not just the fighter, but something in between. Something whole. The house creaked softly around us, familiar and welcoming. Grandma Carter would have loved this, I thought. Not just preserving the building, but filling it with new life, new memories. Later that night, after our friends had left, I found one last surprise in Ryan's letter, a small key taped to the bottom of the page. Found this in our things, his postscript read. It belongs to Grandma's old jewelry box. The real one, not the decoy she kept on her dresser. Maybe you'll have better luck finding it than we did. I showed Ethan, watching his eyes light up with recognition. The attic, he said. She always told us the house had secrets, but only for those patient enough to discover them properly. Tomorrow we'd climb into the attic and search for that hidden box. Tomorrow we'd add another chapter to this house's story. But for now, I was content to sit with Ethan, listening to our home's quiet breathing, feeling the perfect balance between my past and present. The last light of day filtered through our windows, casting long shadows that looked almost like they were dancing. Somewhere in Seattle, Ryan and Vanessa were building a new life. Here, in this house that had seen both battle and peace, we were building something too. Not just a home, but a testament to the fact that sometimes the strongest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them find their way back to themselves.
You think you can just waltz back into our lives with empty promises and a guilty conscience? The words spilled out of my mouth before I could stop them, my voice laced with years of pent-up resentment. I watched as my husband Declan flinched at my accusation, his carefully crafted facade cracking ever so slightly. For a moment, the man I'd once loved stood before me, exposed and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the charming, successful marketing executive he portrayed to the world. Thea, please, let me explain, he pleaded, his eyes darting around our modest suburban home, as if searching for an escape. I crossed my arms, steeling myself against the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Explain what, Declan? That you've been lying to me all this time? That you've been leading a double life? The words hung in the air, the weight of their truth bearing down on us both. I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on, how many times Declan had betrayed my trust. My gaze drifted to our son Finn, who stood silently by my side, his hazel eyes narrowed with a wisdom and maturity far beyond his 15 years. The pain and confusion etched on his face made my heart clench. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, our little family, torn apart by Declan's selfish actions. "Mom, what's going on?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What is he talking about? I hesitated, not wanting to burden my son with the ugliness of his father's transgressions. But Finn deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Your father has been. I paused, struggling to find the right words. He's been keeping secrets from us, Finn. Secrets that are going to change our lives, whether we're ready or not. Declan took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Thea, please, let's not involve Finn in this. This is between you and me. I let out a humorless laugh. Between you and me? Don't you think Finn has a right to know what kind of man you really are? I turned to my son, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Finn, your father has been having an affair. He's been living a double life, betraying our family. Finn's eyes widened, his expression a mix of shock and betrayal. An affair? But how could you, Dad? He shook his head, his voice trembling with emotion. How could you do this to us? Declan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, the silver-tongued charmer was at a loss for words. I took a step closer to Finn, wrapping my arm around him protectively. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Finn, but I promise you we're going to get through this, together. Finn nodded, his jaw set with a determination that belied his age. What are we going to do, Mom? I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering as I stared down my husband. We're going to fight. Declan's betrayal isn't just about me. It's about our family, our future, and I won't let him destroy everything we've built without a fight. Declan opened his mouth, but I raised my hand, silencing him. Save it, Declan. The time for excuses and empty promises is over. Now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. The air was thick with tension as we stood there, 3 lives irrevocably changed by the unraveling of Declan's web of lies. But in that moment, I knew that Finn and I would emerge stronger, our bond forged in the crucible of adversity. This was our fight, and we were ready to win. The next few days were a blur of fury and determination. After Declan's botched attempt to smooth things over, I knew I couldn't trust him anymore. There was only one thing left to do: uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. So, with Finn's help, I started digging. We followed Declan's movements, tracking his comings and goings, piecing together the fragments of his double life. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a clue that would change everything. One evening, as Declan was leaving for another late night at the office, Finn and I decided to follow him. We trailed his car through the city streets, our hearts pounding in anticipation and dread. Finally, Declan pulled into an upscale apartment complex, one I didn't recognize. "This is it, Mom," Finn whispered, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Let's see what he's hiding." We waited, hidden in the shadows, as Declan let himself into the building. Minutes later, a young woman emerged, her blonde hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to the modest suburban housewife I had become. "Who is she?" Finn asked, his voice laced with anger. I shook my head, my own fury building. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." We watched as the woman entered Declan's car, and the two of them drove off together. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Betrayal, rage, and a twinge of heartbreak swirled within me, each emotion fueling my determination to uncover the full extent of Declan's deception. "We need to get inside that apartment," I said, my gaze locked on the building. Finn nodded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'm with you, Mom." We made our way to the apartment, and with a bit of lock-picking skill that Finn had picked up from a friend, we were inside. The place was immaculate, clearly maintained by someone with Declan's refined tastes. But it was the personal touches that made my blood boil. Framed photos of the woman, her belongings scattered throughout the space. "He's been living a double life," I murmured, the reality of the situation sinking in. "All this time, he's been deceiving us, betraying our family." Finn's jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. "We're going to expose him, Finn. We're going to bring his whole world crashing down around him." "How?" Finn asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I turned to him, a grim determination etched on my face. "We're going to plant the seeds of his downfall. We're going to use his own deceit against him, and we're going to make sure he pays for what he's done." Finn nodded, his expression mirroring my own. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever it takes." We left the apartment. The evidence of Declan's infidelity burned into our minds. The drive home was silent, the weight of our newfound knowledge heavy upon our shoulders. But I knew that this was only the beginning. Declan's betrayal would not go unanswered, and I would stop at nothing to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. As we pulled into our driveway, I turned to Finn, my eyes meeting his. "Get ready, Finn. The storm is coming and we're going to be the ones to weather it." The walls of our home seemed to close in on me as Finn and I returned from our investigation. The reality of Declan's betrayal weighed heavily, a dark cloud that threatened to consume us both. Finn was the first to break the silence. "Mom, what are we going to do?" I could hear the trepidation in his voice, the fear that his family was falling apart. He was just a child, yet he was forced to grapple with the ugly truth of his father's deception. "We're going to fight back," I said, my own voice steady and resolute. "Declan needs to be held accountable for what he's done." Finn's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking within them. "How? What's the plan?" I paused, weighing my words carefully. "We're going to use his own lies against him. We're going to expose his affair and the embezzlement at his company." Finn's brow furrowed. "Embezzlement? You think he's been stealing from his company?" I nodded grimly. "It's the only explanation for the lavish apartment and the way he's been living. Declan's always been good with numbers, and it wouldn't be hard for him to siphon off funds." Finn's expression shifted, the innocence of youth replaced by a steely determination. "Okay, what do we do?" I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "Finn, this isn't going to be easy. What we're about to do could have serious consequences. Are you sure you're ready for this?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, Mom, whatever it takes." I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at his unwavering loyalty. Declan had betrayed us, but Finn and I would stand united, no matter the cost. "All right, here's what we're going to do." Over the next few days, Finn and I worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence against Declan. We scoured his financial records, meticulously documenting the discrepancies and misappropriated funds. Alongside that, we set the stage for exposing his affair, planting breadcrumbs that would lead directly to his mistress. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience and precision. Finn proved to be an invaluable partner, his sharp mind and keen observation skills complementing my own. Together, we wove a web of deceit that would ensnare Declan, leaving him no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. As the final pieces fell into place, Finn and I stood in our living room, surveying the evidence before us. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Finn asked, his eyes reflecting the weight of what we were about to do. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. Declan needs to pay for what he's done. This is the only way to ensure our family's future. Finn took a deep breath and then squared his shoulders. "Okay, let's do this." With a few clicks of the mouse, the incriminating information was sent out into the world. Anonymous tips that would unleash the storm upon Declan's carefully constructed facade. In the quiet that followed, Finn and I stood together, our hands clasped tightly. We had taken the first step, and now the dominoes were set to fall. Whatever happened next, we would face it as a united front, mother and son, determined to reclaim our lives from the ashes of Declan's betrayal. The days that followed were filled with a tense anticipation as Finn and I waited for the dominoes to fall. We knew that it was only a matter of time before Declan's world came crashing down around him, and we were both equal parts terrified and resolute. The first signs of the impending chaos came when Declan started acting strangely. He was distracted, his usual charm and confidence replaced by an underlying anxiety. I watched him, feigning ignorance as he made frantic phone calls and retreated to his study for hours on end. "Something's wrong," Finn whispered one evening as we sat in the living room pretending to watch TV. "Do you think he knows?" I placed a comforting hand on his arm. "If he does, he hasn't confronted us yet, but we need to be prepared for when he does." Finn nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What's the next step?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We need to plant the final piece of evidence, something that will irrevocably link Declan to the embezzlement and his affair. Finn's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. "What do you have in mind?" "I've set up a false paper trail," I explained, my voice low and steady. "Documents that will implicate Declan in the embezzlement, with his mistress as the motive." Finn's expression shifted, a glimmer of unease crossing his features. "Mom, are you sure about this? I mean, we're essentially framing him." I reached out and squeezed his hand, my gaze unwavering. I know, Finn, but Declan has left us no choice. He destroyed our family, and now he has to face the consequences. Finn nodded, his jaw set with determination. Okay, let's do it. Together, we carefully planted the evidence, ensuring that it would be discovered at the most opportune moment. As we finished, a sense of finality settled over us, the weight of our actions palpable. It's done, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. What now? I pulled him into a tight hug, my own emotions threatening to spill over. Now we wait, and when the time is right, we'll be there to watch Declan fall. The next few days were a blur of tension and anxiety. Declan's behavior grew more erratic, and I could see the strain taking its toll on him. Finn and I kept our heads down, acting as if nothing was amiss, but the anticipation was palpable. Then, the moment we had been waiting for arrived. Declan burst through the front door, his face contorted with rage and panic. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted, his eyes wild. I stood my ground, my expression calm and collected. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Declan." "Don't give me that crap, Thea," he spat, his hands trembling. "I know you're behind this. The company is investigating me, and they've found evidence of embezzlement, and—" He trailed off, the color draining from his face as he realized the full extent of his downfall. "And your affair," I finished, my voice laced with a quiet triumph. "Looks like the walls are closing in, Declan." Declan stared at me, his mouth agape, unable to form a coherent response. In that moment, I saw the man I had once loved for who he truly was, a coward, a liar, and a betrayer. Finn stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You brought this on yourself, Dad. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned and fled, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house, a fitting symphony to the crumbling of his carefully constructed life. As the door slammed shut, Finn and I stood together, our eyes meeting in a silent understanding. The first phase of our plan was complete, and now the final act was about to unfold. The days that followed Declan's confrontation were charged with a tense and uneasy silence. Finn and I knew that the final act was about to unfold, and we steeled ourselves for the inevitable fallout. Declan, for his part, had become a shadow of his former self. Gone was the confident, charismatic man I had once loved. In his place was a desperate, cowering figure, constantly looking over his shoulder. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. One evening, as Finn and I sat in the living room, the sound of Declan's car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I turned to Finn, my gaze unwavering. "It's time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn nodded, his expression resolute. We moved to the front window, watching as Declan hurried up the path, his movements frantic and erratic. The front door burst open, and Declan stumbled inside, his eyes wild and his face twisted with anguish. "Thea! Finn!" he cried, his voice cracking with desperation. "What have you done?" I stepped forward, my arms crossed over my chest. "What are you talking about, Declan?" "Don't play dumb with me," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "The company knows about the embezzlement. They know about Elise." Finn tensed beside me, his jaw clenched tight. "So your little affair has finally caught up with you, huh, Dad?" Declan's gaze snapped to our son, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. "You two? You did this, didn't you? How could you?" I held up a hand, silencing him. "We did what we had to do, Declan. You brought this on yourself." "But I'm your husband," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the house. "How could you do this to me?" "You lost the right to be our husband and father the moment you betrayed us," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You destroyed our family, Declan. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his head cradled in his hands. "Please, Thea, Finn, you have to help me. I can't lose everything." Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. "You should have thought about that before you started lying and cheating. Now it's too late." Declan looked up at us, his eyes pleading. "I'll do anything. Please, just help me." I shook my head, my heart hardening against the man I once loved. "It's too late for that, Declan. The die has been cast." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us all freeze. Declan's face paled, and he scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate search for an escape. "That's her," he whispered, his voice trembling. Elise. I watched as the front door opened, and a young woman stepped inside, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Declan? What's going on? She asked, her gaze sweeping over the scene before her. Declan moved towards her, his hands outstretched. Elise, you have to help me. Thea and Finn, they've... But before he could finish, a barrage of text messages and emails began to flood Elise's phone. She looked down, her eyes widening as she read the messages, her expression shifting from confusion to fury. Declan, what is this? She demanded, her voice rising in pitch. Embezzlement? Affair? Declan's face crumpled, and he reached for her, but Elise recoiled, slapping him across the face. You lied to me, she spat, her eyes brimming with tears. All this time you were using me. Declan cowered, his once proud demeanor shattered. Elise, please, I can explain. But Elise was already turning towards the door, her steps quickening with each passing moment. It's over, Declan, she called out, her voice thick with disgust. I want nothing to do with you. And with that, she was gone, leaving Declan alone, his world collapsing around him. Finn and I watched, our expressions stoic, as the final dominoes fell, and Declan's reckoning had arrived. The fallout from Declan's downfall was swift and unforgiving. In the days following the confrontation at our home, the evidence we had so meticulously planted began to surface, sending shockwaves through his company and personal life. Finn and I watched with a mixture of triumph and unease as the revelations unfolded. Declan's embezzlement scheme had been uncovered, with a paper trail leading directly back to him. His affair with the younger colleague Elise had also been exposed, her angry tirades and accusations splashed across social media for all to see. The company's executives were swift to act, convening an emergency board meeting to discuss the shocking allegations against their star marketing executive. Finn and I positioned ourselves strategically, ensuring we would have a front-row seat to Declan's downfall. As the meeting commenced, the tension in the room was palpable. Declan, once the picture of confidence and control, sat hunched in his chair, his eyes darting around the room in a futile search for a way out. Mr. Langston, the CEO began, his voice grave, we've received some disturbing information regarding your conduct at the company. Allegations of embezzlement and an inappropriate relationship with a colleague. Do you have any explanation for these serious charges? Declan's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He was trapped, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. I don't know what to say, he stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. The CEO's expression hardened. Perhaps you'd like to explain the substantial transfers of company funds into a personal account, or the considerable sums spent on lavish gifts and trips for this colleague of yours. Declan swallowed hard, his face pale and drawn. I can explain. It's not what it seems. I was just trying to. Save it, Declan, the CEO interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. The evidence against you is overwhelming. You've betrayed the trust of this company and your family. As of this moment, you are terminated from your position, and we will be pursuing legal action against you. The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, executives shouting and demanding answers, the sound of Declan's world crashing down around him. Finn gripped my hand, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and vindication. It's happening, Mom. He's getting what he deserves. I squeezed his hand, my own expression grim. Yes, Finn, but this is only the beginning. As the meeting descended into chaos, I scanned the room, searching for any sign of Elise. It wasn't long before I spotted her, her face a mask of fury and betrayal. Declan caught sight of her, his eyes widening in panic. Elise, please, you have to help me. You know I love you. We can... But Elise cut him off, slapping him hard across the face. How dare you, Declan? You used me, lied to me, and now you expect me to help you. You're pathetic. Declan recoiled, his hand clutching his reddened cheek. Elise, please. I can make this right. We can... There is no we, Declan. Elise spat, her voice trembling with emotion. We're done. I want nothing more to do with you or your twisted little family. With that, Elise turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Declan to face the consequences of his actions alone. As the executives continued to berate and interrogate Declan, Finn and I watched in silence, our plan unfolding flawlessly. The dominoes were falling one by one, and Declan's world was crumbling around him. In that moment, I knew the hour that our long-awaited revenge was at hand. Declan had betrayed us, and now he would pay the price. The echoes of his betrayal would reverberate through his life, a haunting reminder of the consequences of his actions. The days that followed Declan's public downfall were a whirlwind of chaos and upheaval. As the investigation into his embezzlement and affair deepened, the once respected marketing executive found himself stripped of his job, his reputation, and the life he had so carefully crafted. Finn and I watched from the sidelines, our expressions a mix of grim satisfaction and a hint of unease. We had engineered Declan's downfall, but the weight of our actions still lingered, a constant reminder of the difficult choices we had been forced to make. The news of Declan's transgressions spread like wildfire, splashed across headlines and social media. His colleagues, once admirers of his success, now turned on him with a vengeance, their disgust and outrage palpable. The company he had worked for unceremoniously severed all ties, leaving him to face the legal consequences of his actions alone. One afternoon, as Finn and I sat in our living room, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a distraught Elise, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Thea, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Elise, what are you doing here?" She pushed past me, her gaze wild and erratic. "I can't believe this is happening. Declan, he's ruined everything." Finn appeared at my side, his expression wary. "What do you want, Elise?" Elise whirled around, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I want to know why you did this. Why did you destroy Declan's life?" I held up a hand, my voice calm and measured. "Elise, Declan brought this upon himself. He betrayed our family, and we had to take action." "But I loved him," Elise cried, her hands clenching into fists. "I thought we had something real. How could he do this to me?" Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Declan was using you, Elise. He's been lying and cheating his whole life. You were just one of his victims." Elise shook her head, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I can't believe it. All this time I thought he was the one. And now?" She trailed off, a sob escaping her lips. I reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "I'm sorry, Elise. I know this is difficult, but Declan's actions have consequences. You deserve better than him." Elise looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. I don't know what to do. My life is in shambles because of him." Finn stepped forward, his voice soft but resolute. "You have to move on, Elise. Declan is going to face the full weight of the law for what he's done. You don't have to be a part of that." Elise nodded, her jaw clenching with determination. "You're right. I can't let him drag me down, too." She turned to the door, pausing for a moment. "Thank you, Thea. Finn, I hope you both can find a way to move on from this, too." With that, she was gone, leaving Finn and I alone once more. We stood in silence, the weight of our actions heavy on our shoulders. "Do you think she'll be okay, Mom?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, pulling him into a tight hug. "I hope so, Finn, but right now we need to focus on rebuilding our own lives." Finn nodded, his arms tightening around me. "What about Dad? What's going to happen to him?" I felt a twinge of regret, but it was quickly overshadowed by a steely resolve. "Declan will have to face the consequences of his actions, Finn. The authorities are already closing in on him. It's time for him to pay for what he's done." Finn's grip on me tightened, and I knew that, despite the difficulty of our situation, we would emerge stronger. Declan's betrayal had shattered our family, but Finn and I would rebuild, stronger and more resilient than ever before. In the aftermath of Declan's downfall, Finn and I found ourselves grappling with a range of emotions: relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope for a brighter future. The dust had settled, and while the scars of his betrayal remained, we were determined to move forward and reclaim our lives. As the legal proceedings against Declan unfolded, the full extent of his misdeeds became public knowledge. The embezzlement charges were staggering, and his affair with Elise only added to the tarnish on his reputation. Declan, once a respected and influential figure, now found himself shunned by his former colleagues and facing the very real possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. Despite the gravity of the situation, Finn and I took solace in the knowledge that justice was being served. Declan would have to answer for his crimes, and we could finally begin to heal and rebuild our lives without the burden of his lies and deceit. As the weeks turned to months, I found myself reconnecting with old friends and colleagues, my dedication to my nursing career becoming a source of pride and purpose. The promotion I had been working towards for years finally materialized, and I reveled in the validation of my hard work and resilience. Finn, too, blossomed in the absence of Declan's toxic influence. He threw himself into his studies, his grades soaring as he set his sights on prestigious colleges and universities. The light in his eyes had returned, and I could see the weight of the world slowly lifting from his shoulders. One evening, as Finn and I sat in our living room enjoying a rare moment of peace, the doorbell rang. I tensed, half expecting to see Declan on the other side pleading for our forgiveness. But when I opened the door, I was greeted by an unfamiliar face, a stern-looking police officer. "Mrs. Langston?" the officer asked, his voice neutral. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you, officer?" "I'm afraid I have some news regarding your husband, Declan," he said, his expression unreadable. Finn appeared at my side, his eyes filled with trepidation. "What happened?" The officer cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between us. "Mr. Langston has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for his crimes. The embezzlement and affair charges were substantial, and the judge deemed him a flight risk." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by a twinge of sadness. Declan had brought this upon himself, but the finality of his punishment was still a difficult reality to accept. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for informing us, officer." The officer nodded, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "If you have any questions or need assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us." With that, he turned and left, and Finn and I were left alone once more. I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "It's over, Finn," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Declan's finally going to pay for what he's done." Finn nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm glad, Mom. I'm glad we fought back. I'm glad we didn't let him get away with it." I pulled him into a tight hug, a weight lifted from my shoulders. "Me too, Finn. Me too." In the days and weeks that followed, Finn and I continued to rebuild our lives, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities. I secured the promotion I had worked so hard for, and Finn excelled in his studies, his sights set on the future. As we sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace and resilience that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Declan's betrayal had shaken us, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between Finn and me. We had weathered the storm, and now we were stronger for it. "You know, Finn," I said, my gaze fixed on the horizon, "I'm proud of you. Proud of us. We've come a long way, haven't we?" Finn reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with understanding. "Yeah, Mom, we have, and I'm glad we did it together." In that moment, I knew that our future was bright and that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, Finn and I would face them side by side, our bond stronger than ever before. "I gave you everything, Zeke. My love, my trust, my father's legacy, and this is how you repay me?" I gripped the damning photos in my shaking hands, the glossy images of my husband's infidelity blurring through my tears. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When Zeke and I first met, it was a whirlwind romance. He was charming, ambitious, and innovative, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. My father, the founder of our successful real estate development company, took an immediate liking to him. Zeke joined the company and quickly gained favor, his star rising as a brilliant architect. But as his reputation grew, so did his ego. Late nights, schmoozing clients at fancy dinners and exclusive clubs became the norm. When I expressed my concerns, Zeke dismissed them, claiming I didn't understand the demands of his job. I wanted to believe him, to trust that his heart remained true to me and our daughter, Violet. I was blind. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. The photos in my hands told a different story. There was Zeke, his lips locked with a young intern at a company event. Natalie, her name was, pretty, ambitious, and clearly enamored with my husband. "Mom?" Violet's voice shook me from my thoughts. "What's wrong?" I hastily wiped my tears, but it was too late. She'd seen the photos scattered across my desk. "It's your father," I managed, my voice breaking. "He's been having an affair." Violet's face contorted with anger. "What? With who?" "An intern. Natalie." "That bastard!" Violet slammed her fist on the desk. "You have to confront him, Mom. This can't go on." I shook my head, fear gripping my heart. I can't. The scandal, the company. Your grandfather's health is declining. The stress could kill him. And what about the stress this is causing you? Violet demanded. He doesn't deserve your protection, Mom, not anymore. Deep down, I knew she was right, but the thought of my carefully constructed world crumbling around me was paralyzing. The sound of the front door opening snapped me back to reality. Zeke was home, no doubt fresh from another late night at the office. I quickly gathered the photos, shoving them into a drawer. Violet glared as Zeke entered the room, his suit impeccable, but the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to him like a guilty verdict. "What's with the long faces?" he asked, his charm now seeming so false, so hollow. Before I could respond, Violet stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "How could you, Dad? How could you cheat on Mom, on our family, with some intern?" Zeke's eyes widened, darting to me in panic. "Stella, I can explain," but I held up a hand, silencing him. The pain in my heart had crystallized into something harder, sharper. Determination. "No more lies, Zeke," I said coldly. "No more excuses. You've made your choice. Now you'll face the consequences." I didn't know what those consequences would be yet, but one thing was certain. I would not let this man destroy everything my father had built, everything I had worked so hard to protect, even if it meant destroying him first. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, my mind still reeling from the revelation of Zeke's betrayal. As I walked through the halls, I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. "I'm telling you, man, Zeke's got it made," a male colleague said. "That new intern, Natalie, she's practically eating out of his hand. He said she's the reason he landed the Johnsons' project." Laughter echoed from the room. "I bet she is. I heard they have a special bond, if you know what I mean." Rage boiled inside me. Not only was Zeke cheating, but he was using his affair to advance his career. I fought the urge to storm in and confront him, knowing I needed to play this smart. My phone buzzed with a text from Violet. "Skipped school. Following Dad. Caught him bringing Natalie to the lake house. Taking pictures now." My heart sank. The lake house was our family's sanctuary, a place filled with cherished memories. How dare he taint it with his sordid affair? I quickly replied, telling Violet to be careful and come home immediately. Then I made a decision. If Zeke wanted to play dirty, I'd dig up every speck of dirt on his precious Natalie. A few phone calls later, I had my answer. Natalie had a history of seducing married men at her previous jobs, using her charm to extract money, gifts, and favors. She was nothing but a gold-digging homewrecker. As I sat fuming in my office, my secretary knocked on the door, her face ashen. "Mrs. Delaney, I'm so sorry. It's your father. He's had a heart attack." The world tilted beneath my feet. "What? Is he—" "He's alive, but in critical condition. Your mother is with him at the hospital." I rushed to the hospital, my thoughts a tangled mess of grief, anger, and fear. When I arrived, my mother was in tears, clutching my father's hand as he lay unconscious, hooked up to beeping machines. Zeke burst in moments later, his face a mask of concern. "Stella, I came as soon as I heard. How is he?" I couldn't even look at him, my disgust threatening to overwhelm me. "Like you care. You're probably just worried about your precious promotion." "How can you say that?" Zeke had the audacity to sound wounded. "Your father is like a second dad to me. I love him." "Spare me the act, Zeke. I know about Natalie. I know everything." Before he could respond, the doctor entered, his expression grim. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Delaney has passed away. We did everything we could." The room spun. I collapsed into a chair, my mother's wails echoing in my ears. Zeke tried to embrace me, but I shoved him away, repulsed by his touch. The funeral was a blur. Zeke played the role of the grieving son-in-law to perfection, shaking hands and accepting condolences, but I caught him whispering to Natalie, their heads bent together conspiratorially. After the service, the family lawyer gathered us for the reading of the will. To everyone's shock, my father had named me the sole heir and CEO of the company. Zeke's face contorted with rage, his mask slipping. Violet squeezed my hand, her voice low. "I told Grandpa about Zeke's cheating before he died. He wanted to make sure we were protected." Zeke cornered me after the lawyer left, his eyes blazing. "This is absurd, Stella. You know I'm the one who should be running the company. You're not cut out for this." I stood my ground, drawing strength from my daughter's love and my father's trust. The only thing absurd here is your behavior, Zeke. You've lied, cheated, and betrayed this family. You're not fit to lead a dog on a leash, let alone this company. You're making a huge mistake, Stella, Zeke snarled. If you don't give me control, I'll ruin you. I'll destroy everything you hold dear. I looked him straight in the eye, my resolve unwavering. Bring it on, Zeke. You have no idea what I'm capable of. You want a war? You've got one. The first order of business was to remove Zeke from the company. I had him escorted from the building, his access revoked, and his email account terminated. The look of shock and fury on his face as security led him out was a small victory, but I knew it was only the beginning. Next, I called an emergency board meeting. Armed with the evidence of Zeke's affair and unethical business practices, I laid bare his betrayal. The board was stunned, but unanimously voted to support my decision to fire him. I thought I'd feel a sense of triumph, but all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. The man I had loved, the father of my child, was nothing but a snake in the grass. Zeke wasted no time retaliating. He started calling our clients, spinning tales of my incompetence and instability. He even went to the media, painting me as a scorned, vengeful wife who couldn't handle the pressure of running a company. But his most vicious move came in the form of a lawsuit. Natalie, the intern he'd been sleeping with, filed a sexual harassment claim against the company. She alleged that I had created a toxic work environment out of jealousy and spite. I was served the papers in the middle of a client meeting. As I read the lurid accusations, my stomach churned with rage and disgust. This is all lies, I said through gritted teeth. Zeke is behind this. He's using her to get back at me. My lawyer, a fierce woman named Olivia, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. We'll fight this, Stella. Zeke and Natalie won't get away with it. But the damage was done. The lawsuit hit the news, and suddenly, our company was synonymous with scandal. Clients started pulling their projects, investors backed out, and our stock prices plummeted. I was drowning, barely keeping my head above water as I fought to save my father's legacy. Violet, my rock through it all, refused to let me give up. We'll find a way to beat them, Mom, she said, her eyes blazing with determination. We just need to fight fire with fire. Late one night, as I pored over legal documents and financial reports, Violet burst into my home office. Mom, look what I found. She thrust her phone into my hands, a series of texts displayed on the screen. I read them quickly, my heart pounding. They were messages between Zeke and Natalie detailing their plan to take over the company and force me out. I hacked into Dad's old phone, Violet explained. He never changed his password. There's more, Mom. Natalie's pregnant. She's claiming it's Dad's baby, but I think it's all part of their scheme. I felt sick to my stomach. Zeke's cruelty knew no bounds. He was willing to use an innocent child as a pawn in his twisted game. We need to expose them, I said, my voice shaking with anger. We need to show the world what kind of monsters they really are. Violet nodded, a fierce smile on her face. I have an idea. The annual company gala is coming up. What if we confront them there, in front of everyone? We can present the evidence, expose their lies, and watch them crash and burn. It was a risky plan, but I was out of options. Zeke and Natalie had backed me into a corner, and I was ready to come out swinging. Let's do it, I said, my resolve hardening. Let's take those bastards down. As I hugged my daughter close, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Zeke had underestimated me, underestimated the strength of a mother's love and the power of the truth. He wanted a war? He was about to get one hell of a battle. The night of the gala arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. Violet and I had spent weeks gathering evidence, piecing together the sordid details of Zeke and Natalie's scheme. We had bank statements, recorded conversations, and a damning trail of emails that painted a clear picture of their deceit. I smoothed my hands over my dress, a sleek black number that made me feel powerful, armored. Violet squeezed my hand as we entered the ballroom, the glittering chandeliers and elegant decor, a stark contrast to the ugliness we were about to expose. Zeke was holding court in the center of the room, Natalie draped on his arm like a trophy. They were all smiles and charm, working the crowd with their lies and manipulation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. With Violet by my side, I approached the stage, the evidence clutched tightly in my hands. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? My voice rang out over the din of conversation, and the room fell silent. Zeke's eyes narrowed as he saw me, his jaw clenching with anger. Natalie's smile faltered, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "I have something important to share with all of you tonight," I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. "The truth about Zeke Delaney and Natalie Summers." I held up the stack of documents, my hands shaking slightly. "These are records of their affair, their conspiracy to defraud this company and steal my family's legacy. They've been lying to all of us, manipulating and scheming for their own gain." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Zeke's face turned an ugly shade of red, his fists clenched at his sides. "This is ridiculous, Stella," he spat. "You're just a bitter, jealous woman who can't handle the fact that I've moved on. Those documents are forgeries, lies." Natalie nodded, her eyes wide with false innocence. "She's crazy. I'm just an intern. I would never do something like this." But I wasn't finished. "There's more," I said, my voice steady. "Natalie is pregnant. She's been claiming the baby is Zeke's, using it as leverage to force me out of the company." Zeke blanched, his mouth falling open in shock. Natalie's hand flew to her stomach, her eyes darting around the room in panic. "That's not true!" Zeke shouted, his voice cracking. "The baby is mine. Stella is just trying to turn everyone against me." I shook my head, a mirthless smile on my face. "Oh, really? Then how do you explain these text messages detailing your plans to use the pregnancy to extort money from multiple men?" I held up my phone, the damning texts displayed on the screen. The crowd gasped, their faces a mix of shock and disgust. "And as for the paternity of the baby," Violet chimed in, "we have DNA test results proving that Zeke is not the father. Natalie has been playing all of you, just like she played my dad." The room exploded into chaos. Zeke lunged for me, his face contorted with rage, but security held him back. Natalie collapsed to the floor, sobbing and wailing about how she'd been set up. The police arrived moments later, handcuffs at the ready. As they led Zeke and Natalie away, reading them their rights, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. The truth had prevailed, and my father's legacy was safe. I turned to Violet, tears streaming down my face. "We did it, baby. We won." She hugged me tightly, her own tears mingling with mine. "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." As the guests began to disperse, whispering and gossiping about the night's events, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles to fight, more wounds to heal, but for now, I savored the victory, the knowledge that I had faced my demons and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Zeke had tried to break me, to shatter everything I held dear. But he had underestimated the power of a woman's resilience, the unbreakable bond of a mother and daughter united against all odds. And that was a mistake he would regret for the rest of his miserable life. The fallout from the gala was immediate and intense. The news of Zeke and Natalie's arrests spread like wildfire, plastered across every newspaper and gossip site in the city. The company was inundated with calls from reporters, investors, and clients demanding answers. I spent hours in meetings with the board, lawyers, and PR teams, trying to control the narrative and minimize the damage. It was exhausting, but I refused to let Zeke's actions destroy everything we had built. Violet was my rock through it all, keeping me focused and grounded. She even took on some of the media responsibilities, giving interviews and statements with a poise and maturity far beyond her years. "You're amazing. You know that?" I told her one evening, as we sat in my office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. "I couldn't do this without you." She grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, someone has to keep you in line, Mom. Can't have you going all scorned woman on us again." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "I think I'll leave the dramatics to the soap operas from now on." But our moment of levity was short-lived. The next day, I received a call from the prison where Zeke was being held. "Mrs. Delaney, this is Warden Johnson. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your husband was found dead in his cell this morning. It appears to be a suicide." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. For all his flaws and betrayals, Zeke had once been the love of my life, the father of my child. The thought of him taking his own life, alone and desperate, was almost too much to bear. Violet found me in my room, staring blankly at the wall. "Mom, what's wrong?" I told her the news, my voice hollow and distant. She sat beside me, her arms wrapped around my shoulders as I wept. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I know you loved him, despite everything." I nodded, my tears soaking her shirt. "I did. God help me, I did. But I also hated him for what he did to us, to the company. I don't know how to feel." "You don't have to know," Violet said softly. "You're allowed to grieve, to be angry, to feel however you need to feel. But don't let his choices define you, Mom. You're so much stronger than that." Her words were like a beacon in the darkness, guiding me back to shore. I hugged her tightly, marveling at the incredible young woman she had become. The funeral was a small, somber affair. I stood beside Violet, holding her hand as we watched the casket being lowered into the ground. Natalie was there, her belly swollen with her lies, her face a mask of crocodile tears. I felt a flicker of pity for her, mixed with a simmering rage. She had been a pawn in Zeke's game, but she had also made her own choices, her own mistakes. She would have to live with the consequences, just as I would. As the mourners dispersed, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd. It was Olivia, my lawyer, her expression grim. "Stella, I need to talk to you," she said, pulling me aside. "It's about Zeke's death. The police found a note in his cell addressed to you." My heart seized in my chest. "What did it say?" Olivia hesitated, her eyes filled with concern. "He claimed that you drove him to it, that you ruined his life and left him no choice. He's trying to make you responsible, even in death." I felt a white-hot anger surge through me, mingled with a sickening dread. Even from beyond the grave, Zeke was still trying to manipulate me, to twist the truth to suit his own ends. "He's not going to win, Olivia," I said, my voice low and fierce. "I won't let him destroy me, not anymore. I'm going to fight back, with everything I have." Olivia nodded, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. "I know you will, Stella, and I'll be right there beside you, every step of the way." As I walked away from the cemetery, Violet's hand clasped tightly in mine. I knew that the battle was far from over. Zeke's final act of cruelty had opened up a new front in the war, one that threatened to consume me from the inside out. But I also knew that I had the strength, the courage, and the love to prevail. I had my daughter, my company, and the truth on my side. And that was a force that even death itself could not defeat. 1 year later, I stood at the podium addressing a room full of journalists and industry leaders. The company had not only survived the scandal, but thrived under my leadership. We had expanded into new markets, taken on innovative projects, and cemented our reputation as a force to be reckoned with. But the road to recovery had been long and painful. In the wake of Zeke's death and the revelation of his final cruel message, I had been besieged by media attacks and legal challenges. Natalie, desperate to save herself, had tried to paint me as a ruthless, vindictive woman who had driven her poor, innocent lover to suicide. It was a narrative that some were all too eager to believe. I faced accusations, investigations, and even death threats from those who bought into Zeke and Natalie's lies. But I refused to back down. With Violet and Olivia by my side, I fought back against every false claim, every attempt to smear my name and my company. We dug deeper into Zeke and Natalie's past, uncovering a trail of deception and manipulation that stretched back years. We found other women Zeke had targeted, other companies he had tried to infiltrate and destroy. We exposed Natalie's history of extortion and fraud, revealing the true depths of her cruelty and greed. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The media started to question Natalie's credibility, to see through the cracks in her story. The legal challenges against me were dismissed, one by one, as the evidence of my innocence mounted. And then, the final blow. Natalie's web of lies unraveled completely when it was revealed that the child she had claimed was Zeke's had actually been fathered by another married man she had been scheming against. She was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and extortion. As I watched her being led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. She had thought she could destroy me, could use my pain and grief as a weapon against me. But she had underestimated the strength of a woman who had already lost everything and survived. Violet, now a successful artist in her own right, had channeled her own pain and anger into her work. Her pieces, raw and powerful, had garnered critical acclaim and sparked important conversations about toxic masculinity and the resilience of women. "I'm so proud of you, Violet," I told her, as we celebrated her latest exhibition. You've taken the darkest moments of our lives and turned them into something beautiful, something meaningful. She hugged me tightly, her eyes shining with tears. I learned from the best, Mom. You showed me what it means to be strong, to fight for what's right, no matter the cost. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace and purpose that had eluded me for so long. We've both come so far, haven't we? Sometimes I can hardly believe it. Believe it, Mom, Violet said, her voice filled with conviction. We're survivors, you and me. We're unbreakable. As I looked out over the city skyline, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, I knew she was right. Zeke and Natalie had tried to break me, to shatter my world into a million pieces. But I had taken those pieces and rebuilt myself, stronger and more resilient than ever before. I had my daughter, my company, and the knowledge that I had faced the worst that life could throw at me and emerged victorious. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had claimed her power and her truth. And I knew, with a certainty that burned bright in my soul, that nothing and no one could ever take that away from me again. As I stepped down from the podium to a standing ovation, I caught Violet's eye in the crowd. She grinned at me, her fist raised in a gesture of solidarity and triumph. Here's to the future, Mom, she mouthed, her eyes sparkling with pride and love. I raised my own fist in return, feeling a rush of gratitude and joy that brought tears to my eyes. Here's to the future indeed, a future that we had fought for, that we had earned, that we had claimed as our own. A future that belonged to us and us alone. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Zeke and Natalie sat at the defendant's table, their faces pale and drawn. They had been denied bail, deemed a flight risk after the extent of their crimes had been revealed. I sat in the front row, Violet and Olivia beside me. We had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering evidence and testimony, yet building an airtight case against the two people who had nearly destroyed our lives. As the judge entered the room, I felt a shiver run down my spine. This was it, the moment of truth, the final reckoning. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Valerie, laid out the case against Zeke and Natalie with ruthless efficiency. She detailed their schemes, their lies, their callous disregard for the lives they had ruined. She called witness after witness, each one painting a damning picture of greed, manipulation, and betrayal. Former employees, clients, even some of Natalie's other victims, they all took the stand, their voices shaking with anger and pain. And then it was my turn. As I walked to the witness box, I felt a rush of nerves and adrenaline, but I also felt a sense of clarity, a deep conviction in the truth of my words. I told my story from the beginning, the love, the trust, the dreams that Zeke and I had shared, the slow, insidious unraveling of our marriage as his ego and ambition consumed him, the devastating discovery of his affair, his betrayal, his cruelty. I spoke of the battle to save my company, my father's legacy, from their clutches, the lies, the smears, the legal challenges that had nearly broken me. But I also spoke of the strength I had found in my daughter, in my friends, in the power of the truth. As I finished my testimony, I looked directly at Zeke and Natalie, my eyes blazing with a fierce, righteous anger. You thought you could destroy me, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. You thought you could take everything I had, everything I loved, and crush it beneath your feet. But you were wrong. Zeke's face twisted with rage. His fists clenched at his sides. Natalie's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a way out. I am not the weak, broken woman you thought I was, I continued, my voice rising with each word. I am a survivor, a fighter, a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect her child, and I will not rest until justice is served, until you pay for every last one of your crimes. The courtroom erupted in applause, the sound washing over me like a wave. I looked over at Violet, tears streaming down her face, her eyes shining with pride and love. The judge called for order, his gavel banging against the bench. And then, the moment we had all been waiting for. In the case of the state versus Ezekiel Delaney and Natalie Summers, on the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, the jury finds the defendants guilty on all counts. The words hit me like a thunderbolt, a shock of joy and relief that brought me to my knees. Violet and Olivia were there in an instant, their arms around me, their tears mingling with my own. I watched as Zeke and Natalie were led away in handcuffs, their faces contorted with shock and disbelief. They had thought themselves invincible, untouchable, above the law and the consequences of their actions. But they had been wrong. They had underestimated the power of justice, the strength of a woman's will, the unbreakable bond of a mother and daughter united against all odds. As I walked out of the courtroom, my head held high, my heart filled with a fierce, unshakable joy, I knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, more wounds to heal. But I also knew that I had the strength, the courage, and the love to face them all. I had my daughter, my company, and the knowledge that I had faced the worst that life could throw at me and emerged victorious. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had claimed her power and her truth. And nothing, not even the darkest of demons, could ever take that away from me again. 5 years later, I stood on the balcony of my new office, overlooking the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the buildings and streets below. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a chance to take stock of how far I had come. The company had thrived under my leadership, growing and expanding in ways I had never dreamed possible. We had taken on new challenges, new projects, new frontiers, and emerged stronger and more successful than ever before. But it wasn't just the business that had flourished. Violet had blossomed into an incredible young woman, her artistic talent and passion taking her to new heights. She had just opened her first solo exhibition, a stunning collection of pieces that explored themes of resilience, healing, and the power of the human spirit. As I looked out over the city, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that had eluded me for so long. The wounds of the past had healed, the scars faded into a distant memory. I had found a new sense of purpose, a new lease on life, a new reason to wake up every morning with a smile on my face. And yet I knew that I could never forget the lessons I had learned, the battles I had fought, the strength I had found within myself. Those experiences had shaped me, molded me into the woman I was today. A woman who knew her own worth, her own power, her own unbreakable spirit. A knock on the door startled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Olivia, a smile on her face, a file in her hand. "Sorry to interrupt, Stella, but I thought you should see this," she said, handing me the file. I opened it, my eyes scanning the pages, my heart skipping a beat. It was a report from the parole board detailing Zeke and Natalie's latest hearing. "They were denied," Olivia said softly. "The board cited their lack of remorse as their continued attempts to manipulate and deceive. They'll be staying behind bars for a long time to come." I felt a rush of emotions, relief, sadness, a twinge of pity for the broken, twisted souls they had become. But I also felt a sense of closure, a final chapter in the story of our shared past. "Thank you, Olivia," I said, my voice steady and strong, "for everything you've done, for standing by me through it all. I couldn't have made it without you." She smiled, her eyes shining with warmth and affection. "You give yourself too little credit, Stella. You're the strongest, most resilient person I know. You've overcome more than most people could even imagine." I hugged her, feeling a rush of gratitude and love for this woman who had been my rock, my anchor, my unwavering supporter through the darkest of times. As she left the office, I turned back to the balcony, my eyes drawn to a small framed photo on the wall. It was a picture of my father, his face beaming with pride and joy, his arm around a much younger version of myself. I felt a pang of grief, a moment of longing for the man who had been my guiding light, my North Star, my constant source of love and support. But I also felt a sense of deep, abiding gratitude for the legacy he had left me, the values he had instilled in me, the strength he had helped me find within myself. "I miss you, Dad," I whispered, my fingers tracing the outline of his face. "But I know you're always with me, always watching over me. And I promise I'll make you proud. I'll honor your memory every single day." As I stepped back from the photo, I felt a sense of renewed purpose, a fire burning bright in my heart. I had been through hell and back, had faced the worst that life could throw at me, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had claimed her power and her truth, and I knew, with a certainty that blazed like the sun, that nothing could ever hold me back, ever again. I smiled, my eyes fixed on the horizon, my heart filled with hope and possibility. The future was mine, and I was ready to face it, head on, with all the strength and courage of a true warrior.